Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about What If Deku's kidnapping, a journey of resilience part 1. If you guys enjoy this what if and want to see part 2, comment down below and let me know before I start. Please do support for more awesome content. And leave a like and don't forget to subscribe to my channel and also share this video with your friends and check out the description in my playlist. So let's start the video. A 4-year-old 𝗧𝗵𝗲 found himself laying on his back, staring up at the blue and white sky above him through half-lidded eyes, as he found moving difficult at the moment. Bruises could be seen on various parts of his exposed skin. His red shirt now ripped in several spots along with a few burn marks, all courtesy of the 3 children who were now walking away. He could hear 𝐭𝐻𝐿's laughter, pride in what he had done, ringing through the air. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 just laid there in pain, so much so he felt like he couldn't move. As the boy he tried to protect walked away without a single word, 𝗧𝗵𝗲 had to wonder why. Why was it like this? All he had done was try to protect someone else just like how a real hero should. So, why couldn't he? Tears began forming in his eyes as he quickly came to the answer that he already knew. He couldn't protect anyone because he, 𝗧𝗵𝗲, was quirkless. The fact that someone without powers had tried to stand up to Bakugo had only transferred the target onto himself. For this time at least. That was the lone positive outcome that came from all this pain. But what about next time? What would happen if 𝐭𝐻𝐿 and the others walked past a beaten and bruised 𝗧𝗵𝗲 as they proceeded to their original target? What would he do if that day ever came? As 𝗧𝗵𝗲's thoughts began to spiral downwards, the doors to a van that had been parked next to the playground he was at suddenly opened as 3 men exited the vehicle. All of them rushed towards the boy. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 only had time to notice their ripped jeans, baggy sweatshirts, and masks hiding their faces before grabbing him roughly and lifting him off the ground. "What?" cried 𝗧𝗵𝗲 in clear panic. But before he could say anything else, a gloved hand clasped itself over the boy's mouth as his eyes went wide in absolute terror. The 4-year-old tried screaming as loud as he could, kicking his legs with all the force he could manage, hoping that someone would see what was happening. For someone to call a hero, to do anything that might save him. As he was quickly carried to the van, heart pounding and eyes filled with tears, 𝗧𝗵𝗲 thought he saw 𝐭𝐻𝐿 down the street. The young blonde had stopped where he was, the only one of the trio who had his head turned and looking in the direction of the van. The feral, savage smile that the blonde had worn on his face while he had beaten the defenseless 𝗧𝗵𝗲 was gone. Now he just stared with wide eyes. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 looked at his childhood friend, pleading with his eyes to do something until the door of the van closed. Then, whether it was because of someone's quirk, his previous beating, or his own terror being too much for him to handle, 𝗧𝗵𝗲 passed out. When 𝗧𝗵𝗲 opened his eyes sometime later, he found himself lying face down on something cold, gray, and dirty. "Where am I?" 𝗧𝗵𝗲 asked aloud to no one in particular while looking around. Getting on his hands and knees, the young boy found himself in an unfamiliar room no bigger than his own back in his family's apartment. Wherever this place was, moonlight shined through the lone window, too high for him to reach, illuminating the few wooden boxes scattered and pressed against the walls. A panic unlike anything 𝗧𝗵𝗲 had ever felt before rushed through him as he frantically looked for a door. It had been around noon when he had gone to the park to play, and if the moon was now out. Finally locating the door, the young green-haired boy raced towards it with fresh tears in his eyes. "Mom, Mom," 𝗧𝗵𝗲 cried out as both hands touched the knob, having to step on the tippy toes of his shoes to reach it. Not hesitating for a moment, the child began trying to open the door the moment the tips of his fingers touched the handle. The only thought he had was to find his mother, rushing out the room and back home as soon as he could. He could only imagine just how worried she must have been at this moment. But, no matter which way he turned the knob or how hard, the door refused to open. "Don't bother," came a soft, weak voice from behind him. "It won't open," 𝗧𝗵𝗲 cried out when he heard the voice, his heart racing even faster now. He had thought he was alone. Shakily, 𝗧𝗵𝗲 turned around to find a girl curled up into a corner next to one of the boxes with its shadow covering her. There she sat, barely looking over her knees as she hugged her legs. As his eyes adjusted to the darkness, 𝗧𝗵𝗲 noticed that there were ears popping out of her long brown hair that reminded him of a 𝗧𝗵𝗲. He might have continued to look for other traces of animal features had he not noticed something shocking. Her eyes. They were tea red, but that wasn't what really caught his attention. It was that they looked dull, almost lifeless, with heavy bags under them. "Hi," began the boy, pressing his back against the door as he spoke. "I am 𝗧𝗵𝗲. What's your name?" "Raphtalia," she said, her voice sounding hoarse. Then, she let out several loud coughs that seemed to cause her body to rock. "Not like it matters." Once again, the girl began to cough loudly. The sound made 𝗧𝗵𝗲 wince slightly. "What is this place?" asked the boy once he had gathered the same amount of courage he had used when facing 𝗏𝗏𝗏, meaning that there were tears in his eyes, his body trembling with fear. But he forced himself to speak. "Why are we here?" "No idea," Raphtalia managed to say while seeming to sink lower where she sat, like a heavy weight was pressing down upon her. "All I know is that when I first got here, There used to be a lot more kids. Then scary-looking adults came. They asked us about our quirks, taking the ones who had the ones they liked. Haven't the heroes come yet? Asked 𝗧𝗑𝗧. It seemed impossible to the little boy that all of this could be going on without the heroes coming by to stop it. They had to know about it. They had to be on their way to save them. 𝗲𝗡𝗪 just raised her head a little, giving her fellow prisoner a sad smile while a few tears trickled down her face as she silently wept. I don't think they know, she said weakly. I think I've been here a week or two. It's hard to tell anymore. But no one's come. I don't think they ever will. For a moment, all 𝗧𝗑𝗧 could do was to stare at the 𝗲𝗡𝗪 as she slowly lowered her head to stare blankly at the ground while her ears drooped. His throat went dry as he looked upon the girl, so drowned in despair that she had given up on hope. Then, well worry and not. Why? Because I am here. The words flew out of 𝗧𝗑𝗧's mouth before he realized what he had said. Those had been the same words he had heard on his favorite video of All Might. The same words that reassured everyone as he saved them. The words that inspired him more than anything else. Perhaps he had spoken just to reassure her. It seemed to work somewhat, for as the girl looked up, 𝗧𝗑𝗧 tried his best to smile. It wasn't the same awe-inspiring smile that his idol would have given. Instead, it was a wobbly one that displayed just how scared he was himself. Still, 𝗲𝗡𝗪 seemed to relax a little as she gave him a small smile in return as she leaned backward. Thanks for trying, she said, 𝗧𝗑𝗧's smile faltering slightly at just how weak her voice sounded. What should I do? What should I do? Thought 𝗧𝗑𝗧 in fresh panic. There has to be something I can do. Oh, if only All Might were here. He could just bust down the door or the wall. If 𝗏𝗏𝗏 were here, he might be able to use his quirk to make a small hole in the door. In fact, if anyone else was here, they could help out more than I ever could. After all, I'm just a quirkless Deku. I can't. 𝗧𝗑𝗧's thoughts trailed off. A vision of All Might saving people from disaster flashed in the young boy's mind. As 𝗧𝗑𝗧 imagined the towering symbol of peace, a fire suddenly lit inside of him. Without another word, he ran towards one of the boxes and began to push it as hard as he could. No, thought the young boy, his foot nearly slipping underneath him. But 𝗧𝗑𝗧 managed to right himself as the box inched its way forward. I might be quirkless, but I won't give up. There has to be something I can do. I at least need to try. I need to do everything I can so that I can bring back 𝗲𝗡𝗪's smile. A real smile. Otherwise I'll never be a hero. Gritting his teeth, 𝗧𝗑𝗧 pushed harder against the box. His body ached, still a little sore from the beating he had received earlier, causing even more tears to swell in his eyes. But he pressed on, pushing box after box to the window as 𝗲𝗡𝗪 watched him. It took him a while, but eventually, 𝗧𝗑𝗧 had managed to gather all the boxes. Once he had done that, he strained his tiny muscles to lift the boxes up as he slowly began stacking the boxes on top of each other. It wasn't the prettiest thing in the world, but it looked solid enough. Once it was finished, 𝗧𝗑𝗧 took a breath to calm his nerves before beginning a climb as if these were nothing more than massive steps. Once he got to the top, however, he saw that there was no latch to open it with. Oh no, 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 thought 𝗧𝗑𝗧 as a new wave of panic swept over him as he pressed both hands against the glass. He hadn't thought about this. Of course, whoever captured them wouldn't forget about the window. They would have made sure their captives wouldn't be able to just open it and hop on out. Then a thought crossed 𝗧𝗑𝗧's mind, one that sent shivers down his spine. He looked around the room, hoping to find something else that could help him ... but there was nothing. Eyes hardening in determination, 𝗧𝗑𝗧 took a deep breath before climbing back down and walking over to 𝗲𝗡𝗪. Come on, he said with all the confidence he had left in himself. We're getting out of here. As 𝗧𝗑𝗧 swung one of 𝗲𝗡𝗪's arms around his neck in the same way he had seen other heroes carrying people on the internet, he felt her head pressing against his own. Her skin was hot, almost as hot as it was that one time he got really sick. Her hair felt matted, the touch of it almost making his skin crawl, not to mention the smell. And now that he was closer, he could see that her cheeks were redder than they should be. Midoriya didn't comment on any of this, just trying to give her another smile in the hopes that it would reassure her. Together they moved back to the tower that 𝗧𝗑𝗧 had made, the young boy helping 𝗲𝗡𝗪 to climb. It was slow going as 𝗲𝗡𝗪 was so weak that she almost fell over more than once, but somehow they managed to get to the top. Once there, 𝗧𝗑𝗧 took another breath before looking down to his hand, which was balled into a fist. Texas smash. With that cry, 𝗧𝗑𝗧 punched the cheap glass with all the might a child like him could muster. The glass cracked, forcing the young 𝗧𝗑𝗧 to do it again, this time making a hole. The sharp edges of the glass cut into his flesh, blood dripping down his hands as the boy's eyes watered in front of the staring 𝗲𝗡𝗪. But he didn't stop. He kept punching until all the glass was gone. Your hand, breathed 𝗲𝗡𝗪, her eyes glued to the bloody appendage. It'll be fine, said 𝗧𝗑𝗧, doing his best to sound reassuring despite the pain he was in. As he spoke, the boy took off his shirt and began to wrap it around the wounds. It hurt, far worse than anything he had ever felt in his life. But if he managed to save 𝗲𝗡𝗪 and see his mommy again, it would be worth it. So, with another smile, 𝗧𝗑𝗧 brought 𝗲𝗡𝗪's arm around his neck again as they both jumped into the alley below. Izuku did his best to make sure they landed safely. But due to their weakened states as well as the additional weight, not to mention that neither of them had done anything like this before, the two landed face first onto the street. But that didn't keep the young green-haired boy down for long. It's not like he wasn't used to Kaken knocking him down in the dirt all the time anyway. He quickly picked himself as well as the young tanuki girl off the all-alley floor. Neither waited to see if the noises they made had been heard, just moving as quickly as they could towards the alleyway's exit. Once there, Izuku helped Raphtalia down the empty streets, moving past the dark buildings that were both scary and unfamiliar to them. Neither of the children knew how long they walked, both nearly jumping at any unfamiliar sound. But, despite everything, Izuku found himself smiling whenever he looked over at Raphtalia. She was now smiling herself, a flicker of light that hadn't been there before now shining with hope. That hope seemed to give her just a little more energy as she walked beside Izuku. However, Izuku was slowly getting more and more tired. His shirt, now wrapped around his hand, was covered in blood. The loss of blood, the pain in his limbs from everything that had happened to him today, and the loss of adrenaline were now catching up with him. With each step, his small legs felt like they were coated in cement, making moving all the more difficult. Yet the young boy's heroic heart refused to give up now. We just need to find a good adult, thought Izuku, panting heavily in the real world. Hopefully there's a hero around, or maybe a policeman. If we don't find either of them, then a convenience store is our best bet. I heard that many pro heroes and sidekicks like to stop at places like those during late night shifts. Plus the person behind the counter will have a phone. Then we'll be safe. Just gotta keep moving. Please, let there be a hero around. However, as much as he wanted to keep moving to do just that, his body protested. It wanted to rest. It wanted him to lie down, to close his eyes until the morning sun rose. But the boy knew he couldn't. At least, not for long. So just as Izuku was about to suggest that they sit down and rest for a bit, the sounds of men shouting caught their attention. Not bothering to turn around and look, mainly because he was too scared to, Izuku dragged them down a nearby alley. Together they moved as far as they could, stopping once they found themselves facing a chain-link fence and pile of trash bags. No, cried Izuku, his heart pounding in his ears. The quirkless child bit his lip as he looked down at Raphtalia. He could see his own fear reflected in her own terrified gaze. Both of them trembled, not knowing what those men would do to them if they were the same people who kidnapped them. But the two children could tell by the shouting that they weren't happy. Izuku shook his head as he refused to give up, just like All Might. No, the boy managed to say as he quickly looked around before pointing to a particularly large pile of trash bags. Hide in the bags. I'll try and, you'll what, kid? Both Izuku and Raphtalia turned to see one of the men who kidnapped them standing at the entrance of the alley. Though it was dark, his eyes almost seemed to glow with his anger and frustration. Not knowing what else to do, Izuku, with his body trembling and his eyes beginning to water, pushed Raphtalia into the trash bags. I won't let you hurt her, said Izuku. As he echoed the words he had said to Kaken and the other bullies, he raised his bloody hand up to shield himself. He knew it would end the same as it had that afternoon, if not worse. But he had to try. He had to. Maybe he could buy enough time for Raphtalia to escape. But she was so weak and he felt like he was going to pass out soon. Stop playing hero, kid, growled the man coldly, approaching Izuku, who stood his ground while his teeth chattered. Once the villain was close enough, the man swung his leg to kick the poor green-haired boy. But, as the villain's shoe was about to collide with Izuku's arm, something happened. A brilliant green glow appeared on Izuku's arm, lighting the entire alleyway. As Izuku fought to keep his eyes open, he felt something attaching itself to his arm. When the light faded, Izuku found a silver shield with a green gem in its center attached to his arm. The kick collided with the shield, causing Izuku and the villain to stumble backward. Yet the boy barely felt the blow. What the? Yelled the man, eyes wide as he looked at the shield now on Izuku's arm. Clearly he was puzzled by it, just like the boy was. Both had to be thinking, where did that come from? But it was the villain who collected his thoughts first, shaking his head before scowling at the small child. Doesn't matter. Think that will save you. You're coming back with us now. The villain began to walk towards Izuku again, this time pulling back his fist. Then, before Izuku could raise his shield or move or do anything, the sound of a whip cracking filled the air as it wrapped around the villain's arm. My, came a new voice. The voice of a woman. What a naughty boy you are. And not the type of naughty I like. A moment later, Izuku, his eyes becoming harder to keep open, watched as the villain was pulled back by none other than Midnight. The child looked at her, seeing her eyes widening at the sight of the children and the condition they were in. Then her eyes narrowed in rage at the villain, her whip lashing about to strike the man over and over again, causing him to scream in pain. And, as the man fell to the ground, Izuku's strength ran out as darkness overtook him. Izuku awoke some time later, finding himself laying on his back staring up at a wall that was most certainly not the same one from that building the villains took him to. The ceiling was white and clean with no crates in his vision. The room was mostly silent. The only sound he could hear was the steady beeping of a machine. Turning his head, he noticed a window. It was shut, but he could see the various buildings from the city. The sun's rays were shining brightly through the window as if in a celebration that the nightmare he and 𝗵𝗃𝗧𝗟 had endured was over. Then, as soon as he thought of her, Izuku sat up from the bed and began to look around wildly, his messy green hair whipping around as his head frantically turned from left to right. Yet there was no sign of the Tanuki girl nor anyone else in the room. Only one other bed was in the room and it was empty. He did, however, notice a handbag that looked familiar. But, just as he was about to take a closer look, light reflected off something before hitting him in the eye. Wincing, the child moved his arm up and closer to his face, finding himself looking at his own reflection on the smooth metallic surface of the shield. For a long moment as he just sat there staring, all other thoughts leaving him as he just marveled at it. Was this his quirk? How could it? The doctor told him he had too many joints in his pinky toe, that he would never get a quirk. And, as far as he knew, there wasn't a quirk out there like this. What did it do other than stay attached to his arm? As Izuku continued to marvel and question his quirk, his eyes trailed over to his hand. What he saw nearly made him cry out in shock. Scars covered the surface of his hand, some larger than others. No doubt the doctors here had done everything they could to heal him up, but the damage must have been terrible to leave him with so many of them. For a long time, Izuku just stared at his scars as if he were trying to make up his mind about something when the door opened. Looking up, his eyes widened and a smile appeared on his face when he saw that it was his mother. 𝗏𝗏 𝗵𝗃𝗧𝗏 had a disposable cup in each hand, steam rising from one while the other did not. They weren't in her hands for long, dropping them and allowing their contents to slash onto the floor as she raced towards her son. "Izuku, Izuku," cried the poor woman as she wrapped her son up tightly in a hug, the famous Midoriya waterfall tears flowing down her face. "I was so worried about you when you didn't come home last night," she sobbed as she held her baby boy close to her chest. "I tried to call the police, but they said it was too soon to start looking for you. Then I got a call and ... when I saw what those monsters had done to you. Oh, my poor baby. I'm just so glad the heroes managed to find you." Izuku tried to say something, to tell his mom that all the bad guys did was take him into a van, lock him into a room, and only tried to hurt him when he tried to escape. But, for some reason, he found his voice caught in the back of his throat. "Looks like the little hero is up and about." Both Izuku and his mother looked up, finding Midnight standing there. Dressed in her hero costume, she strode into the room, avoiding the puddles of tears on the floor, all with a warm smile on her face. "Why, you're Midnight, the R-rated hero," exclaimed Izuku, his eyes sparkling at having an actual pro-hero before him. Without the fear of pain he had before, his fanboy nature came racing to the surface as he had so many questions for the woman. What does R-rated mean? How does your quirk work? Can you control how many people you can put to sleep? Does your quirk smell weird? I wish I had my notebook for you to sign." As the questions spilled out of Izuku while Midnight approached the bed, 𝗏𝗏𝗧𝗏 stood up as the hero approached them. Not that Izuku paid it too much mind, for he knew now, for certain, he was safe. He was in a hospital with plenty of good adults around, his mom in the same room as him as well as a pro-hero. Meaning that, suddenly Izuku's mouth clamped shut. A guilty feeling washed over him as he began clutching at the bed sheets the same way he did when he was trying to hide behind his mother. Then, when he looked at Midnight again, his fanboy nature was pushed to the side. "Oh my, 𝗏𝗃𝗧𝗏," said Izuku as he focused on the heroic woman before him. "She's the girl who was with me. Is she okay? She was with those men longer than me and she wasn't looking well. Is she here? Did someone call her mommy and daddy? Can I see her? You really are a little hero in the making," Midnight said softly while giving a gentle laugh. She then sat on the bed, close to Izuku with a smile on her face. As he looked at it, he instinctively compared it to the smile All Might would give. While it wasn't as powerful as the mightiest of heroes, it held enough power in it to tell him that all was well. Thank you for saving my poor baby. If it hadn't been for you," began 𝗏𝗏𝗏 only to stop as Midnight shook her head, a smile still on her face as she kept her gaze on Izuku. "You have it wrong, Mrs. Midoriya," Midnight said. "It's your son who really saved the day. If it wasn't for him, me and all the other heroes in the area would have never known about that filth hiding right under our noses. I just managed to come in at the end and tidy things up," as 𝗏𝗏𝗏 held in a gasp. Midnight's hand reached over to Izuku's as fingers gently caressed his scars. "I just got done speaking to that little cutie you saved," continued the pro-hero. "She's going to be okay, but she has a long road ahead of her. The doctors told me that if she had remained back there for much longer ... well, the important thing is that you saved her. She told me everything you did to get her out of there, including how you got those scars. And it was because of that green light that I was able to find you." Then, Midnight leaned forward, planting a small kiss on Izuku's forehead. The green-haired boy blushed so much that his diamond-shaped freckles were hidden underneath all the red. "What happens now?" asked 𝗀𝐭, looking beside herself, tears mixed with fear and pride running down her face. "Well, first I'll need to take Izuku's statement along with the police," said Midnight in a more official tone, though her eyes never left the small boy. "I know he's been through a lot, more than any child his age should ever need to go through. But the sooner we do this, the quicker we can round up all those involved and start looking for the children we couldn't save." Midnight then leaned a little closer to Izuku. "So, can you do that for us, Izuku? Can I ask you to be brave for just a little bit longer? Then, after you're done, I promise you'll get to see your friend. The little cutie really wants to say thank you to her hero." Izuku suddenly found it hard to swallow, tears threatening to fall from his face when he heard that. At the same time, 𝗀𝐭 had brought her hands up to her mouth, looking like she too was about to start crying. All because someone out there thought of him as a hero. Not just any hero, but their hero. And that realization made the young child want to start crying like never before. Yet somehow he managed to hold it in. He looked at Midnight for a moment before nodding, the green gem in his shield twinkling slightly as he began his story. Izuku, it's time to get 𝗀𝐭." Midoriya's sentence was cut short as she opened the door to her son's room, a frown appearing on her slim face. She stood there, a pink blouse and blue skirt that went down to her knees with an apron over it. Appearance-wise, nothing much had changed with her save a few lines around her eyes as well as some minor weight gain that she had never been able to get rid of from the stress of what happened almost 10 years ago. Thankfully, it wasn't all that noticeable. The room she was looking into was practically an all-might shrine, with posters of the #1 hero covering up most of the wall while figures of the blonde man lined most of the shelves. There were a few other action figures of other heroes such as Midnight and Crust, but you would need a keen eye to spot them. There was one area of the room that was free of all might, the workbench where Izuku, now a 14-year-old teen, sat in front of, half dressed in his school uniform. The black jacket of 𝐒𝐴𝐺 high hung on the back of his chair. The green-haired boy was so engrossed in his current project that he hadn't heard either his mother's voice or her opening the door. Instead, he continued to chisel at the band of metal as he formed it into a highly decorated bracelet with several small red-colored gems embedded into it. Off to the side were several other items Izuku had made recently. Things like hairpins, keychains, rings, and other such items that he had crafted himself now laying in small boxes. "Izuku," repeated 𝗀𝐭, her voice louder and full of motherly authority. This seemed to do the trick as Izuku jumped in his seat, the tool he was using flying out of his hand before landing on the floor with a thump. "What?" cried the teen, a hand moving to his heart as he looked around in startled panic, until he looked at the door, his face relaxing as he looked at his mother. "Oh, Mom, sorry, you scared me." As Izuku turned in his seat, fully facing his mother, the teen's elbow collided with one of the few books on his workbench, a book on ancient medicines. Already there was a row of small glass vials lining the back of his workspace, each one filled with a green liquid and capped. "Have you been up all night?" asked 𝗀𝐭, raising an eyebrow at her son as she eyed his uniform, looking for any signs that it was the same one he had worn yesterday. "No," laughed Izuku, standing up, putting on the jacket of his middle school uniform, the sleeve of which slid underneath the shield that had been on his arm since he was 4 years old. Despite being unable to remove it from his body, the jacket slid underneath the shield as if it wasn't there. "I'm not making that mistake again. I just got up a little early and, well, inspiration hit me as I was getting dressed. Didn't want to lose it, so I started working and, well, you know the rest." "Okay," replied 𝗀𝐭, relaxing. She was still giving her son a motherly look. "But next time inspiration hits, how about you just jot it down in one of those notebooks of yours?" A smile then appeared on 𝗀𝐭's face as she saw her son's horror-filled expression. "Mom, you know those are my hero journals," Izuku said in a panic, his eyes darting to his stack of hero notebooks next to the bed. "I can't just sketch something like that in one of those. They'll get mixed up. Better than being late for school," said 𝗀𝐭. "Now come and eat your breakfast or else you'll be going to school hungry." Later, the green-haired youth made his way down the sidewalks towards his middle school, one eye on his phone as people and even a few philolials passed him by. On occasion he would glance up at the large, feathery ostrich-like creatures, noting the light shading of colored feathers on their heads before going back to what he was looking at. While he still had some interest in them, the shock of their creation a few years ago had worn off as they were now more common. When he was about halfway to his destination, the young Midoriya spotted an odd sight. Camera crews were taking pictures of a hero he'd never seen before, a blonde-haired woman dressed mostly in purple with horns coming out of her head. Standing next to her, head hung low while being heavily bound, was someone who Izuku could only assume was a villain. His heart sank a little as he began to put two and two together. He had missed a hero fight. Perhaps this woman's big debut. "I can't believe this," thought the teen, his shoulders sagging in disappointment. If I had just left a little earlier, I could have made it here in time to watch the whole thing. Maybe Mom's right. The next time inspiration hits, I'll just write it down. Guess I better get a different notebook for them. Maybe a sketch pad so I don't get them mixed up. Or one of those mini notebooks that, just as Izuku's mind was starting to go into overdrive, he spotted something else that caught his attention. There, on all fours and looking down on the ground, was another hero, Kamui Woods. A mix of horror and excitement washed over Izuku as he looked at the hero. Horror that he had missed out on seeing the wood hero in action. Excitement that, if he helped out, he might have left something behind for Izuku to use. For the next several minutes, Izuku began looking around any area that wasn't taped off by police until he found what he was looking for. It was a piece of wood, larger and thicker than any of the nearby trees, which also had the same patterns on it that the pro hero's mask and gloves. If he was right, and the boy had a very good feeling that he was, then it had been created by Kamui Woods. Most likely it had been broken off during the fight with the villain. Quickly taking it, he rushed over to Kamui Woods, asking if he could keep it. The wood hero just gave a shrug at that as he got up. With permission given, Izuku held up his shield and stared at the green gem in its center. As he held the wood up, Izuku began to recall memories of what had happened after midnight and the police had questioned him. Once they had left, the hospital staff had gone to work making sure he was taken care of. As the doctors had further examined Izuku's hand to make sure there was no lasting damage besides the scarring, they had also called upon their own quirk specialist that they had on hand. He was a kindly, slender, middle-aged man whose quirk gave him stethoscopes that dangled from his earlobes. Several times, Izuku was brought up to his office in the children's ward and received tests from the man, who seemed just as excited about quirks as the young Midori. This had put Izuku at ease, making him all the more grateful that he didn't need to see his previous doctor who had bluntly told him he was quirkless. Then, when the tests were finished, the doctor sat before Izuku and his mother just like the last time. Only, this time, the doctor seemed to be rocking back and forth in his seat as he tried to hold back his excitement, like he was practically bursting at the seams to tell what he had discovered, eyes darting from the boy to the shield on his arm before returning to the boy again. Well, this isn't the type of quirk you see every day, he said with a grin. Oh my, I don't know where to begin. I guess I should start off by telling you that the name of your quirk is called Legendary Weapon, Shield. I never thought I'd live to see it in real life. Izuku's eyes had widened when he heard that, almost sparkling with excitement at hearing that. Legendary Weapon, Shield? That sounded so cool. With a name like that, his quirk had to do something amazing. Yet, while the little boy bounced with excitement to match the doctor, his mother just glanced down at the shield with a slight frown. Legendary Weapon, she said in a questioning tone. Doctor, what is that exactly? To be honest, we don't know, replied the doctor, his eyes widening while his smile seemed to grow. And that's what's so exciting. Your son isn't the first one to wield this quirk. Since the dawn of quirks, this quirk has appeared twice before. Nor is it the only weapon-type quirk out there. They are rare and appear just as often as the shield. According to my records, the last time this quirk was seen was around 100 years ago in Europe along with 3 other weapons, the sword, the bow, and the spear. And because these quirks are not passed down genetically and behave differently than how normal quirks work, there are some quirk specialists who believe that these weapons are not really a quirk. Rather, they believe that people like young Izuku here have a quirk that allows them to summon forth and bond with these weapons. But there are others that disagree, saying that they have to be a part of a quirk and ... The doctor, who had begun to stand as his speech became more and more excited, suddenly paused as he noted the wide-eyed expressions on both the Midoriya's faces. Quickly realizing that he needed to calm down, the doctor took a deep breath before sitting back down to continue his explanation. Well, the truth is, I have spent the last few days trying my best to find any records detailing information about the shield. Sadly, there are very few. For right now, all I can tell you is that he's now a bit more durable. Hopefully, in time, he'll be able to discover what his quirk can do. And, maybe he'll be willing to share this information with me. Pretty please. Since that day, Izuku had learned a few things about his quirk. For starters, he discovered that while he could move the shield around his body, he was unable to take it off. He had also learned that, back when he started middle school and wanted to take up kendo, he was unable to hold the wooden sword. In fact, whenever he tried to pick up any type of weapon, it would be repealed right from his grasp. While both of those things were interesting, they paled in comparison to the most interesting feature of his shield. Holding up the piece of wood over the gem, Izuku released it and watched as it sank into the center of his shield. The green gem then glowed for a moment as the image of a massive, interconnecting group of circles appeared in his mind. Izuku had no idea what prompted him to try this in the first place. He remembered that he had been young and had used a simple leaf at the time. But, from that simple leaf, Izuku learned that by doing this he could gain new shields, and each new shield granted him new abilities. With his leaf shield, Izuku found that he could learn more about the plants he came into contact with, but also modify them slightly. Not to any insane degree like other heroes, just making them healthier. At least, at first. Since then, the green-haired youth had gained an impressive collection of shields from all sorts of materials. From rocks to bugs to animal fur and even everyday items, Izuku fed them all into the green gem, gaining all sorts of different shields. Though some of his best shields came from people with quirks, Izuku stayed where he was, watching as a new circle in his metal grid was added. With a smile, he turned to continue his track to school. It took Izuku a good 20 minutes of speed walking to make it to his middle school with only a few minutes to spar. Walking down the halls, he passed by several people who greeted him warmly, to which the teen waved in greeting as he made his way to his homeroom. Once there, Izuku took his seat only to have one of his fellow classmates approach him with a nervous expression. "Hey, Midoriya," said the teen. "Look, I know I promised I wouldn't pester you about that request. But, well, Hinata's birthday is coming up really soon and—" "Oh, right." Without another word, Izuku reached into his bag to pull out a small box. Holding it out, the green-haired teen opened it, revealing a silver pendant shaped like a hydra, blue and green crystals embedded in its 3 necks. Attached to the pendant was a silver chain. Upon seeing it, Izuku's classmate's eyes softened in appreciation as he pulled out his wallet. "Midoriya, you are my hero right now," the classmate exclaimed happily, handing Midoriya the previously agreed-upon amount before taking the box in his hand. "Well, I wouldn't go that far," replied Izuku humbly as he put the money away, his head down so that no one could see the hints of the blush appearing on his face. "I would," replied Izuku's classmate, "not letting this go. I mean, I'm hoping me and Hinata can get into the same school. But if we don't, and she ends up going far away, I at least want her to have something to remember me by. Something special, one of a kind like her, and something that I can afford. Hey, I know you're hoping to get into the UA. But if the hero course doesn't work out, then maybe you should just do this full time. I know I would if I had your skills." Just as Izuku raised his hand to wave off this comment, the sound of a foot being slammed onto a desk rang out through the room. "Oh, please." The loudly spoken words came from none other than Katsuki Bakugo, his voice gaining the attention of everyone in the room. The ashen-haired blonde, who was sitting at a desk near the window, turned to fix his seemingly eternal angry red eyes upon the 2 teens. "As if Deku has even the slightest chance of getting into a school like UA," continued the blonde bomber. "Sure, his quirk might be a step up from the rest of you extras, but not by much. Not nearly enough to get into the best hero school in the country. Why would they even consider letting in a nobody with a shitty defensive quirk like his? Well, there's no harm in trying Kachin." Bakugo, seemingly enraged by Midoriya's calm and friendly tone, turned in his seat to slam both feet onto the ground. The explosive blonde then stood, causing most of the rest of the class to jump back save for 2, Midoriya, who just continued to look at him with a smile on his face, and the classmate standing next to him who just gave Bakugo a deadpan expression. Snarling, Bakugo began to approach the green-haired teen. "Do you think that you can stand up to a villain?" began Bakugo before he suddenly cut himself off, the anger in his face lessening for a moment as his eyes shot towards Izuku's scar-covered hand. He then made a face as if the appendage had insulted him, grinding his teeth before turning around. "TCH, do whatever you want," said the blonde as he turned around, hands shoved into his pockets. "Just stay out of my way or I'll kill you." With that, Bakugo walked back to his seat. Everyone watched as the explosive blonde sat back in his seat, an angry aura seeming to surround him as he did so. "Has the dude never heard of crust?" mumbled Izuku's classmate, rolling his eyes as he said this. Just then the bell rang, signaling the beginning of class. Hearing that, the classmate then turned to look at the shield user, a grateful smile on his face as he held up the box. "Thanks again, Midoriya. I'll be rooting for you." With that, Izuku's classmate turned away as he pocketed the gift. At the same time, Izuku just pulled out his school supplies and began setting them on his desk just as the teacher walked in carrying a huge stack of papers. When classes ended, Izuku left the building while exchanging a few words with various students along the way. The only one who ignored him completely was Bakugo, who just shot him a dirty look before turning to look away. Not that Izuku took it too personally. Having known Bakugo for years, he was used to it. As he left the school grounds, he turned and began walking a familiar route towards the gym he frequented. This wasn't one of the larger, more well-known gym chains in the region, but instead a small, family-owned gym. And while they couldn't offer the more specialized equipment that the larger gyms offered to people with various quirks, the equipment was well-maintained and the price was easy on his wallet. I wonder how long I should work out tonight," thought Izuku as he began to plan out his night. 2 hours would give me the best workout and I don't have that much homework tonight. But I do want to hit the bookstore and see if they have any more books on medicine. Plus I need to get in as much studying as I can if I want to pass the written portion of the UA entrance exam, so maybe working out for an hour. No, wait, an hour and a half. Smiling at his decision, Izuku reached into his pocket to pull out his phone so he could double-check the time the bookstore closed as well as see if there was any noteworthy hero news that happened since lunch. As soon as he held the phone up, his eyes fell onto his scars. Scars that were a reminder of why he wanted to be a hero. To save others with everything he had and to bring back their smiles. Just like how he had with 𝗲𝗲𝗪. A blush found its way onto Izuku's freckled cheeks as he recalled the last time he had seen 𝗲𝗲𝗪 at the hospital. She had been brought into his room in a wheelchair, and despite how sick she was, the girl was bursting with so much life and smiling so much that Izuku almost didn't recognize her. Tears had welled up in his eyes, happy that he had been able to give that back to her. That he had been able to do what people like All Might did all the time. The only way that moment could have gotten any better was if the mighty symbol of peace himself came in to give Izuku a thumbs up. I wonder how she's doing, thought the young man. Maybe, someday, I'll see her again. With that, Izuku continued on his path to the gym. Only 10 months remained before the UA entrance exam after all. Izuku Midoriya walked past the gates that lead into the legendary UA, his eyes sparkling with awe and wonder at everything around him. Standing tall on the path before him stood the great school that had helped to create some of the greatest heroes Japan had ever seen. Heroes such as All Might and Endeavor, the current number 1 and 2 heroes. What was even more amazing was that some of their alumni even returned to teach. And out of all the heroes whose careers he tracked a tad more thoroughly, Izuku knew that Midnight, the heroine that had saved him years ago, had been here for some time as its art history teacher. A smile crossed his face as Izuku thought of the woman, hoping that he would get the chance to see her and thank her again for what she had done. To show her that the little hero she had saved all those years ago had grown into someone who could stand on his own 2 feet to save more people. As Izuku continued this short trek to the main building, he began to take note of several of the other examinees. One student, a girl with bright orange hair tied to the side, was walking not too far from Izuku with her head down as she read from a small notebook, most likely giving herself a quick refresher. Off to the side, standing in the shade of a tree, was a teen whose head was that of a blackbird. He just seemed to stand there, eyes closed as if trying to find some sort of focus. While those two seemed calm and collected, Izuku also noticed some that were not handling the stress all that well. One of them, a boy whose mutation quirk gave him an oddly shaped head that sort of looked like a clay bulb, appeared ready to have a silent panic attack as he shied away from all those passing by. Not too far from the panicking teen were a few others who were just standing around as they watched the students enter, biting their thumbs as they scanned the competition. Izuku also noticed one teen with wild purple hair and looking like he hadn't slept in days. This teen was walking towards the building with his head down as if he knew he was marching towards certain failure. Then, as Izuku was watching the purple-haired teen, someone walked between them. Izuku's eyes were drawn to this student wearing a light gray middle school skirt that stopped right above her knees and a matching blouse that had a pink bow around the neckline. While he had failed to notice her face, Izuku saw she had long flowing brown hair that went all the way down her back. As he followed her hair downward, the teen noted that she had a sheathed sword attached to her waist. The teen marveled at the weapon as she seemed to be the only one to have one, nearly distracting him from the fact that she also had a tail. A tanuki tail to be exact. Now Izuku's eyes widened as he quickly looked up to the top of her head, seeing that she had cute tanuki ears sticking out of her hair. In all his life, he had only met one person who had those features. But it couldn't be, could it? 𝗲𝗲𝗪, called out Izuku. His voice came out before he realized what he had done. Surprised by what he had done, a hand went up to cup his mouth from saying anything else but stopped midway as the girl came to a halt. Swiftly she turned to look at him with a curious and puzzled gaze. The girl looked at him for only a moment before her features showed that she recognized him. Izuku watched as a hand went to her mouth as she looked down at his shield in hand. The last bit of confirmation of his identity. Izuku, 𝗲𝗲𝗪 suddenly shouted, startling a few people around her. But she didn't care as she leaped into the air towards the boy. Landing in front of him, 𝗲𝗲𝗪 instantly reached out with both hands to grasp his scarred hand. Izuku felt his heart beat a little faster as he felt her fingers tracing those marks gently. I can't believe it's really you, 𝗲𝗲𝗪 said much more softly, her tone almost musical to his ears as she looked into his eyes. Blood rushed to Izuku's face, nearly causing it to become scarlet as his hand was being caressed by this very pretty girl. Vaguely he was aware that nearby students were now eyeing them, one of them apparently so focused on them that he tripped and fell on his face. But Izuku never pulled his hand away, just letting her slightly calloused hands touch his own until she finally let go. It's been a while, 𝗲𝗲𝗪, he responded with awe in his voice. Are you here to try and get into the hero program? Yep, exclaimed 𝗲𝗲𝗪 with a bounce in her step while one hand went to her sword sheath and held it up a bit. My parents were against it at first. After what? Well, you know. They told me I should just join them in the family's fishing business instead. Much safer, but I eventually wore them down. They even signed me up for some swordsman lessons. Now I'm a whole lot stronger than when we first met. Izuku's smile faded a little, a hand going up to cup his chin as he looked down at the sword. That's great, but will they let you use that sword? He asked. At that, 𝗵𝗃𝗧𝗟 crossed her arms over her chest with a proud smile. According to the rules, I can as long as I made or helped make it. It's been verified and everything. As 𝗵𝗃𝗧𝗟 then held up a hand, making it look like she was going to go into a more detailed explanation, Izuku felt something colliding with his shoulder. Out of my way, Deku, same to you extra. If you two just want to stand around flirting all day long, take it somewhere else, growled 𝗵𝗃𝗀𝗁 as he pushed past 𝗵𝗃𝗧𝗟 without giving her another glance as he made his way to the entrance. Well, that was rude, commented 𝗵𝗃𝗧𝗟, hands moving to her hips while her ears twitched in annoyance. Izuku, do you know that guy? Izuku found himself giving her an apologetic smile on his childhood friend's behalf while nodding slightly before gesturing for 𝗵𝗃𝗧𝗟 to follow him. Together they moved side by side towards the building's entrance while staying in the ashen blonde's wake. As they walked together, Izuku gave a brief explanation about his childhood friend. Later, after the written exam had concluded, Izuku sat in an auditorium along with many of the other examinees with Kaken seated next to him. As the explosive teen grumbled that he was stuck sitting next to the shield user, Izuku scanned the room looking for any signs of the Tanuki girl. His eyes brightened when he spotted 𝗵𝗃𝗧𝗟 seated closer to the front seated next to a floating schoolgirl's uniform. Before Izuku could even blink in surprise, the lights of the auditorium suddenly turned off, causing a bit of a stir among the students. But those voices quickly went silent when a spotlight suddenly illuminated the podium on the stage before them where a new figure stood. Izuku's eyes widened as he instantly recognized the man, with the sparkling eyes of a heroic fanboy. It took everything within his power not to let out a squeal of joy. It was the great DJ hero, Present Mic, and the best part, he was in full costume. Oh, this was so much different than sitting in his room listening to the pros radio show and imagining him wearing his trademark stylish leather outfit, the multidirectional speaker attached to his neck, the shades, and the blonde hair that shot straight up. His attempts to hold back his gushing of the pro hero failed instantly as 𝗵𝗃𝗀𝗁 glared at him. Stop your damn fanboying, the ashen blonde growled under his breath. What's up, UA? Candidates, thanks for tuning into me, your school DJ. Come on and let me hear ya, cheered Present Mic, his voice brimming with energy. The hero's body twirled around as he spoke and his hands waved excitedly in the air. Yet not a single person answered his call as silence filled the room. Not that Present Mic seemed to mind as he waved a finger at those gathered. Keeping it mellow, aren't ya? That's fine. I can dig it. So let's skip ahead to the main show and talk about how this part of the exam is going to go down. Are you ready? Yes, shouted Izuku, unable to hold back his fanboy nature as he stood up swiftly while throwing his hands in the air. Of course, this had the effect of drawing the attention of pretty much everybody in the room. All the other examinees stared at him as if he had gone mad while Kaken hid his face in his hands. If I get the chance, I swear I'm going to kill you, he muttered through gritted teeth. For a moment, Izuku just stood there as the realization of what he had just done, as well as being the only one to do this, sunk in. Giving a nervous laugh, the green-haired teen slowly sat down while scratching the back of his head. Like your application said, continued Present Mic, who somehow seemed to have gained more energy in his voice as his smile widened. It was like having a student finally responding to him lit a fire within his very being. For the remainder of the exam, you rocking boys and girls will be doing mock battles in super hip urban setting. After I drop the mic, you will all be heading to your designated battle zones. Do you dig me? At that moment, everyone looked at the cards lying in front of them. After turning them over, Izuku saw what battlefield he was to enter. He also noticed that 𝗵𝗃𝗀𝗁 had stolen a glance at his card as well. I see, said 𝗵𝗃𝗀𝗁 as he leaned back into his own seat. They're keeping us apart so people who know each other can't work together. You're right, whispered Izuku in a tone that he hoped only his neighbors could hear. Our exam numbers are right next to each other, but they have us split into different combat areas. 𝗵𝗃𝗀𝗁 glared at Izuku, his red eyes flashing in anger as he pulled his card away from the shield user. Get your eyes off my card, he growled. Damn, I was really looking forward to crushing you. Okay, let's check out your targets, exclaimed Present Mic, raising a hand as the large screen behind him lit up displaying what Izuku assumed was a model of the city they would be fighting in. There are also 3 silhouettes of 3 robots. There are 3 types of foe villains in each battle center. You'll earn points based on their level of difficulty, so choose wisely. Your goal in this exam is to raise your score as quickly while shredding these villains like a mid-song guitar solo. But check it, make sure you're keeping things heroic. Attacking others is a big UA. No. Just then, someone in the crowd in front of Izuku raised his hand. Excuse me, sir, came the loud, uptight voice of one of the male students. But I have a question. Hit me, yelled Present Mic. At once a second spotlight began to shine down upon the one who had spoken. This applicant had dark blue hair that was parted in the middle along with rectangular glasses. He wasted only a moment after being enveloped by the light before stiffly standing at attention. From what Izuku could see, this person's expression was firm, almost to the point of being overly serious, as he held up one of the handouts they had been given. On the printout, you listed 4 villains, not 3, said the bespectacled teen, his voice filled with great annoyance. With all due respect, if this is a printing error on official UA materials, it is shameful. We are exemplary students. We expect the best from Japan's most notable school. A mistake such as this is shameful and will not do. Additionally, you with the unkempt hair. The boy then turned to point a finger at Izuku, who, in turn, pointed a finger at himself, as if to say, do you mean me? You've been muttering this entire time. Stop that. If you can't bother to take this exam seriously, then I suggest you leave. You're distracting the rest of us. Izuku blinked at the teen, who stared at him with an intense look. A look that really didn't bother Izuku, as he just raised his own hand. I also have a question about the robots, said the shield user, his tone far more polite and calm than the first. Yes, caller number 2, asked Present Mike with a wide grin, a spotlight shining down on Midoriya as the DJ hero spoke. You said we had to shred these villains, began Izuku, doing his best to choose the right words. I guess by that you mean destroy. Is that the only way we can take them out, or are there other ways? Hey, I was talking to you, huffed the dark-haired teen who had first spoken, sounding even more annoyed. But Izuku just ignored him, instead keeping his eyes on the pro hero, who was now grinning ear to ear as he waved them down. All right, proclaimed Present Mike, waving his arms in a way to get their attention as well as to calm them down. A loud shout out to our 2 callers with their requests. To answer the first question of the night, the 4th villain type is worth 0 points. That guy is just an obstacle we'll be throwing in your way. They're one of them in every battle center. Think of him as more of an obstacle or hurdle to avoid. It can be taken down, but there's really no point. I recommend to my listeners that you ignore it and try to focus on getting to the top of the charts. And while we're on that subject, to all you rockin' boys and girls out there with non-destructive quirks, you don't need to destroy your foes. Instead, all you need to do is immobilize them for 15 seconds, and then the robots will turn off all on their own. But just remember that you're on a time crunch. At that, Izuku nodded while the blue-haired student promptly sat down. Sometime later, after Present Mike had dismissed them, Izuku found himself standing in front of the massive doorway leading into the testing area. Now dressed in a green tracksuit, the green-haired teen looked on at the others who would be his fellow examinees for this test. Many of them were stretching, warming themselves up for what would certainly be an intense experience. Others showed off the support gear that they had been allowed to bring with them with an air of confidence, as if their devices would be the deciding factor leading to their victory over skill. Thankfully, he spotted a familiar face. Izuku, Raphtalia called out when she noticed her old friend, waving to him excitedly. The Tanuki girl was standing by the gate, now dressed in a loose, red t-shirt that had the image of 2 swords crossed along the chest along with matching red sweatpants. Still strapped to her hip was her sheathed blade. It was the kind of outfit that even a novice could see allowed the girl to move around more easily. Izuku blushed as she approached him, finding her to look extremely beautiful as she smiled at him. This is so wonderful seeing you again, said the girl happily. Why yeah, what are the odds? Replied the boy as he smiled awkwardly at her. Then, before he could say anything else, a thought crossed Izuku's mind. Hey, Raphtalia, would you like to team up for this exam? The Tanuki girl's smile faded for a moment as she blinked at him. Is that even allowed? She asked. Izuku brought a hand to his chin as he began to think aloud. I didn't see a rule saying we can't, replied Izuku as he brought a hand to his chin, muttering aloud as he began thinking aloud. From what I've seen so far, they're splitting people up so that people from the same districts who might know each other won't be in the same test zone. That makes sense since they could have come up with a plan beforehand. But that's all the school has done. Nowhere does it say that it's against the rules for people in the same testing group to team up. After all, heroes do team up when there is a situation they can't handle on their own. So perhaps we should be thinking of the test like that, like it's a mass breakout or something. I suppose that makes sense, replied Raphtalia, though she still held a worried expression. But we'll only be scored on the robots we defeat. True, agreed Izuku with a nod. But the points might be there to serve more than one purpose, like to discourage us from working together. But the way I see it, we can work more effectively together watching each other's backs. Raphtalia nodded, understanding the green-haired boy's reasoning. In exchange for possibly splitting the number of points between them. By working as a pair, they could potentially defeat more robots in the long run while keeping the others safe. All right then, said Raphtalia as her smile returned, her tail beginning to swish back and forth as she took a step closer to Izuku. Now I can show you just how strong I've become since we last saw each other. What's going on over here? Both teens jumped at the sudden, loud shout that carried over the crowd. Almost as one, the pair turned to see the large blue-haired teen walking toward them. And they weren't the only ones, as the entire group became silent as they stood there watching the stern teen chopping his arm in a robotic manner. "You again. Are you trying to mess up our fellow examinees?" Izuku blinked while Raphtalia gave the blue-haired teen a sour look. But before either of them could say anything, the gates opened up to reveal a false city inside. "Let's go, came the voice of Present Mike. As one, all the gathered students raised their heads towards the source of the sound to find the DJ hero standing on top of the wall looking down at them. "What are all you standing around for? There are no countdowns in real life." It took a moment for the words to sink in. When they did, everyone on the ground rushed into the city ready to destroy some robots. The rush of students charged forward in what seemed like a sprint, putting everything into these first few moments in the hope of reaching the robots first. For some of them, their quirks gave them an edge. One of them just so happened to be the tall, stiff teen who seemed to love to scold others. Izuku, with Raphtalia keeping pace next to him, watched as the bespectacled teen shot forward in a great burst of speed, rushing headfirst into the false city and alone with all the dangers it hid. As for Izuku and Raphtalia, once they got to the first intersection, they turned to the right while breaking away from the rest of the group. Dashing down the street, they soon came upon a group of their first villain bots. There were 3 of them in total, each of them a one-wheeled, 2-armed one-point robot. When he saw them, Izuku held up his shield as the tree grid in his mind came to life. "Two-headed black dog shield," called out the boy, his selection made. Instantly, his small shield transformed into the form it gained after Izuku had managed to gain some fur from the pro-hero hound dog. In a flash of green light, his shield became larger and darker in color with 2 dog heads coming out from the top. After it finished changing, one of the one-pointers had closed the distance enough to attack the green-haired hero hopeful. Its metal arm pulled back before striking forward only to connect with the raised shield. However, despite the displaced air and the cloud created by the force of the attack, Izuku remained where he was with a slight grin on his face, like the attack had been nothing. While this alone would have been slightly impressive to others, what happened next would have caused a pro to raise an eyebrow in surprise. Just after the robot had struck the shield, the eyes on the shield's dog heads began to glow red before they extended their necks out to bite at the machine with enough force that their teeth dug into its metal shell. As the twin jaws held tight to the machine's metal skin, even making a growling noise, Raphtalia appeared behind it with her sword drawn. Izuku marveled at the scene before him, Raphtalia seeming to float behind their metal foe with her hair flowing in a breeze created in her own movement and sword raised above her head. With a single slash, she cut the robot in 2 before vanishing again before Izuku's eyes. "Wow," thought Izuku as he quickly began to try and figure out what her quirk was. Can she turn invisible? How does that work? Can she do other things like? Izuku's thoughts were cut short as he saw Raphtalia cut down her second robot. However, before she could turn invisible again, the third robot was already racing toward her. "Airstrike shield," he called out, raising his shield arm in the process. As Raphtalia turned to see the attack coming her way, a green barrier shaped like a shield appeared between her and the robot. The one-pointer hit it with all its might, knocking it back. It was damaged, but not done for. Thankfully, Izuku had an idea that could fix that problem. "Shield prison," he said with a grin. Izuku watched as many shields appeared around the one-pointer to form a sphere before chains wrapped around it. Izuku watched, listening as the machine tried over and over to force its way out. But, after several long seconds, it finally gave up. Once it became silent, Izuku deactivated the shield prison to see that, indeed, the robot was deactivated just as the sword user sliced through their last opponent. Seeing that all their foes were finished, the pair grinned at each other before continuing to move through the city. Very quickly they fell into a routine. Izuku would use his shield to bite and damage the robots, drawing their attention while Raphtalia sliced through them with her sword. Whenever they were outnumbered, Izuku would use his shield prison to capture 1 or 2 of them when he could, trapping them until they deactivated. While Raphtalia did end up destroying more with her skills, thus getting ahead in points, Izuku was getting his fair share as on occasion his 2-headed dog bite shield did take down a few when the heads got a good hit on their necks. As the minutes ticked by, Izuku began to notice that some of the other examinees were starting to get worn out or were in over their heads. More than once, they came across someone who was knocked on their ass looking up at a giant machine ready to attack. These attacks never came, however, as a giant green shield blocked the attack before Raphtalia's blade finished it off. But that was nothing compared to what happened next. Both hero hopefuls saw a beam of light being shot down the street, catching their attention. Looking down from where it came from, they saw a blonde-haired boy surrounded by several 3-point robots. What made it worse was that it appeared that the boy was in no shape to defend himself, as all he seemed to do was clutch at his stomach. Without wasting a second, the two leaped into action as the shield prison enclosed around the blonde, with the examinee protected within the barrier. Izuku and Raphtalia rushed in as the 3-pointers turned to attack. The green-haired shield wielder remained in front as several rubber bullets were fired at him. his shield raised to block them as 𝗲𝗃𝗃 jumped into the air behind him. As she fell, her sword was swung downward to cut one of the three-pointer's head in two. Without missing a beat, she swung to cut the next one while Izuku moved behind her to block another attack. Twin dog heads shot forth from the shield, biting the robot while 𝗲𝗃𝗃 moved out from behind Midoriya to cut down another three-pointer. When the shield prison finally deactivated, the blonde boy saw the pair standing over the wreckage of the robots as they caught their breaths. Unbeknownst to the two hero hopefuls, their actions, as well as all the other students, were being watched. Within a dark room lit only by the light of various monitors, sat the teaching staff of UA. All of them pro-heroes, both current and retired, sat there in multiple rows of chairs that resembled the seating of a movie theater or stadium, observing their potential students from all of the battlefields on the scenes before them. "It seems we have quite the promising group of students this year," said 𝗂𝗧𝗄, the chimera-like principal of the school. The unusual mammal sat in the middle of the front row with a spindly blonde-haired man sitting next to him. And before him was a council with numerous buttons, including one rather large red one underneath a plastic shield. "Clearly the examinees have no idea how many villains are present or their location," continued 𝗂𝗧𝗄, a teacup held in his paw while his eyes flickered from screen to screen. "They have limited time and must cover a vast area in order to hunt down as many targets as they can. Some are using their information-gathering abilities to plan out strategies, while others rely on speed to pull ahead of their peers." As he said this, 𝗂𝗧𝗄 paused for a moment to watch the speedster of this exam. There, on the screen, was the image of 𝐈𝐵 delivering a flying kick right into the body of one of the two-pointer robots. As his score, which was displayed on the bottom of the screen, updated, the mammal noticed something that brought a frown to his face. Unless he had been mistaken, he had seen 𝐈𝐵 turn his head to glance at another examinee being overwhelmed by several one-pointer robots, rather than stopping to help his fellow human, an act that would have been very easy given the amount of skill he had displayed thus far. 𝐈𝐵 had looked away from one and need to continue racing ahead. This caused the mammal to frown a bit, sipping his tea. A part of him wished he could deduct points for such acts, but alas, he could not prove that 𝐈𝐵 had in fact noticed the other examinee or believed that said examinee could get out of this mess on their own. "Of course," began 𝗂𝗧𝗄 as he lowered his cup, "remaining calm under pressure can be a huge advantage, as is power in combat ability." Once more, 𝗂𝗧𝗄 paused as his beady eyes focused on the teen who currently held the most villain points by far. Katsuki Bakugo was shown standing on top of a pile of defeated robots of various values, arms bent and hands upheld as he panted heavily. But despite this and the sweat dripping from his brow, Bakugo smiled with savage glee. There was no doubt in the principal's mind that the boy's quirk was powerful and the skills he had demonstrated were impressive, but the anger he exuded was worrisome. Also, did he also have to keep screaming "die" at the top of his lungs all the time? Then, movement from another scene caught the mammal's attention. "Well, there's something you don't see every day. Cooperation between examinees," said 𝗂𝗧𝗄 in his cheeriest tone, raising his teacup as if to toast the duo of sword and shield. Various teachers turned their gazes towards the screen just in time to witness the pair in action, Midoriya raising his shield to block a strike from a two-pointer robot. As the dog heads on the shield bit into the metal arm, holding it in place, 𝗲𝗃𝗃 moved to slice the arm from the main body before spinning around to cut it in half. With the Tanuki's back turned, she failed to notice the one-pointer robot racing towards her. But Midoriya did see it coming, moving in to block the blow. Many of the heroes who witnessed this began to nod their heads in approval. One of those teachers was none other than Midnight, who eyed the pair's efforts with a smile. After all, it had been no mere coincidence that the two had been placed within the same testing ground. Midnight had recognized them both as the brave little hero and the young girl the moment she had seen their applications into the hero course. As she had watched them fight and aid each other, something that made her heart flutter with excitement, there was a bit of regret that she hadn't tried to get them in on special recommendation. It would have been a simple manner to get them in. Then she would have gotten a front row seat at watching their delectable interactions and gotten to make some of her own comments to further fluster them. Though, to be fair, she had not seen nor heard from them since that day. So her nominating them when she didn't really know what they were capable of wouldn't have been a good idea. Still, it had been worth cashing in the several favors just to make sure they would be together for this. And, as 𝗂𝗧𝗄 pressed the large button to unleash the zero-pointer, she knew that they would continue to impress her. "What is that?" yelled Izuku, his heart pounding, quickly raising his shield in preparation of the worst as the false city around the duo began to shake. While 𝗲𝗃𝗃 readied her sword, a massive blast of wind and smoke raced down the street towards the pair. For a moment, their vision was completely obscured, their other senses on high alert for any danger that might be heading their way. Both could hear various crashing noises and shouts before the smoke cleared, revealing a sight that would forever be burned into their memories. The other students taking the exam were running toward them, their expressions full of fear and panic as they fled. and behind them, rising from the streets, was the 0-pointer. That's worth 0 points. Raphtalia gaped at the still rising 0-point robot in disbelief. Already the large robot was towering over the other buildings, its massive metal claws gripping the roofs of the buildings before it. Its red, 8 eyes upon its gigantic rectangular head seemed to look out and watch those so much smaller than it fleeing. "Oh man, come on Raphtalia, let's," began Izuku before his eyes widened in panic. Just up ahead of them was one of the examinees laying face down on the ground, no doubt having been shoved to the ground in the mass rush to get away from the 0-pointer. But that wasn't what was scarring the teen. Airstrike shield. In the nick of time, a green, shield-shaped barrier appeared above the student. Large chunks of falling buildings collided with the barrier and shattered, leaving only much smaller pieces to land on the student when the barrier faded. "That was close," breathed Izuku in relief as he watched the student get to his feet before running off. That was until more, louder crashes and screams reached their ears. The duo looked at each other, their gazes holding a silent conversation as more people passed them by without so much as a second glance. Then, as one, they nodded at the other before moving. Not away with the rest of the crowd, but towards the behemoth of a robot, running in the direction the other had come from. Izuku and Raphtalia saw that things seemed to be in a state of chaos. Those who were still able to run seemed to have a bad case of tunnel vision, ignoring the debris falling down from the buildings as well as the other test robots still in the streets. As for the rest, they were either on the ground clutching at a bloody arm or leg or else buried under something too heavy for them to lift off all by themselves. "Airstrike shield," shouted Izuku once again. Another barrier appeared next to a group that was running away, creating a wall between them and 2 2-point robots that charged at them. Leaping into action, Raphtalia charged at the foes, ready to slice them into several pieces. At the same time, Izuku began to inspect those that had fallen to the metal foes or had been struck by crumbling building. Izuku helped as many as he could get off the ground at once before telling them to evacuate. After helping them, both he and Raphtalia went to free the remaining students who had been trapped. Those students, once freed, ran off without so much as a word of thanks. Not that either of the two minded as they continued onward towards the 0-pointer. Seconds ticked by as the two ran as fast as they could. Thankfully, there was only a small handful that had been injured and limping along or trapped, which they instantly helped before proceeding. Then, finally, Izuku and Raphtalia came upon the 0-pointer where they saw it in all of its terrifying glory. Both of them trembled, their weapons shaking as they gazed up at the giant mass of metal monstrosity before their eyes. Izuku could face down people like Kaken and that blue-haired teen easily, for he had known and seen far scarier things in his life. But now, as he stood there, he felt that fear again as the looming 0-pointer took on the form of the villain who had tried to capture them so long ago. "Izuku, we should run," began Raphtalia, only to cut herself off, her ears twitching as if they had picked up something. The green-haired youth then watched as the girl next to him gazed at something in the path of the 0-pointer. He turned his attention to it as well, eyes widening at what he beheld. Rubble littered the streets, and in one of the massive piles was a girl with short brown hair. Squinting, he quickly corrected himself that it was just her foot that was caught. Neither of the two even bothered looking back up at the robot, their legs seeming to move on their own. As the two ran, their heroic hearts screamed at all the fears and doubts within their heads, chasing them away. Of course, the two cried out in the real world as well as they put all the energy they had left into this final sprint. Once at the pile of rubble, Raphtalia went to work prying away the debris while Izuku stood between the two girls and the towering 0-pointer. Quickly the teen began going through his list of shields, trying to decide what was the best one to use. However, the majority of his arsenal were counter-based, meaning that the 0-pointer would have to strike the shield in order for it to activate, and he was pretty sure he'd get crushed if he ran up to the massive machine to smack it with his shield. He then thought of the shield prison. Could he make it large enough to contain the monster before him? He had never tried before and it was getting closer. Could he use it to protect him, Raphtalia, and the other girl? It might work, but if it didn't hold long enough they would all get crushed, and he was running out of time. Airstrike shield. Second shield. In front of Izuku appeared not one, but two of his green energy shields, each one as far as Izuku could place them before him. The young man then held up his shield, his body tensed as he braced himself for what was to come. The 0-pointer's treads hit the first shield, stopping it for only a second as millions of sparks appeared around it as the massive treads began grinding against it. When the barrier shattered, Izuku nearly felt himself being forced backward yet still kept its ground. Breathing hard, Izuku watched as the 0-pointer quickly made its way towards his last remaining shield. Now it was so close that Izuku could feel the hot air blasting all around it along with the scent of oil. The same thing happened again, his barrier lasting only a moment before pushing the freckled-faced teen backward. With nothing left to protect them and hoping that the few moments he bought them were enough, Izuku turned to Raphtalia. Thankfully, she had the other brown-haired girl in a standing position. "I got her, but her leg, I think it's sprained," said a panicking Raphtalia. Without saying a word, Izuku raced over to the two of them. Quickly, both of the strangers' arms were placed over their shoulders and together they began to run as fast as possible. But it wasn't fast enough as the shadow of their foe never left them, the rolling of its treads creeping closer with every breath they took. All it would need to do was speed up just a little bit more and the three tired hero hopefuls would become nothing more than smears on the pavement. Then, time's up. As President Mike's voice echoed through the testing ground, the giant robot came to a complete and sudden stop. At the same time, the trio fell forward with relief on their sweating faces. "We did it," panted Raphtalia. "We did it." Izuku could only gulp and nod at Raphtalia's weak voice, a smile appearing on his lips as an old woman with a syringe-shaped cane began to slowly approach them. Later, after the exam had finished and all those injured had been healed by Recovery Girl, Izuku and Raphtalia walked past the security gate of UA. Along with the hundreds of other examinees, the two walked tiredly, dressed in their respective school uniforms, before making their way around the corner. "Wow, UA really doesn't pull their punches in these exams," said Izuku as he gave one last glance at the school. "Guess that's why they're the #1 hero school in all of Japan." "I know. I just hope we did well enough to impress them," said Raphtalia as she too glanced back at the building before turning to look at her friend. "Do you have any idea how many villain points we achieved?" "I sort of forgot after the 0-pointer. Izuku's shoulders slumped. "I know I got over 10 points myself. You probably got way more than that." Then, Izuku lifted himself upright as his warm smile reappeared. "But still, I don't regret what we did back there. I mean, we helped a lot of people. All the people we saved. It might not have given us the points, but that's what a hero is supposed to do." "You're right," agreed the Tanuki girl, her eyes beaming as she looked at her partner during the exam. Then, quickly, she pulled out her phone before holding it close to her chest. "In case we don't get into UA, would you like to possibly exchange numbers? I'd rather not wait another 10 years to talk to you again." Izuku was flushed as he looked at the device in Raphtalia's hand. He had given his number to girls before, but only so they could contact him whenever they wanted to know about their commissions or to check on a homework assignment. This, along with the way Raphtalia was looking away from him, her own cheeks dusting a slight reddish hue with tail wagging slightly, caused his heart to nearly leap out of his chest like a certain alien from a certain franchise. While what followed was awkward, the young Midoriya somehow managed to type his number into her contacts while she did the same with his own phone. The next week or so went by uneventfully for Izuku. Classes at school continued as normal, though a certain ashen blonde teen seemed more confident as of late. Though, to be fair, it was hard for most people to tell, given that Bakugo was not one known for his lack of confidence. The entire class silently came to the collective conclusion that the explosive teen had done well in the exam. The only thing that was really different was that Midoriya was now on his phone more often as he talked to Raphtalia. The two talked like two old friends who hadn't seen each other in years, catching up on everything the other had missed while also telling each other about their day-to-day life. Izuku was amazed when he had heard that Raphtalia had placed highly in a few mixed swordsman tournaments, though not entirely surprised given the skill he had seen. He also got to hear a few of the more exciting fishing stories that the girl had had over the years. The one thing, however, that both of them avoided talking about was speculation about how they did on the exam, as both of them were nervous about it. Then, finally, the day came when Inko found an envelope in the mail with the UA seal stamped on the back. Feeling nervous, Izuku took it to his room where he shut the door before proceeding toward his workbench. For a few minutes, he sat there staring at the object that held his future from within. Then, finally, his hands went to rip it open, revealing that inside was a silver device which landed with a clunk on the table before coming to life. Izuku jumped off his seat, finding the image of All Might being projected into his room. "𝐼AMHERE... is a holographic recording," boomed the man's voice within the room, his hands at his sides in a heroic pose as he made this announcement. Despite being dressed in a yellow pin-striped suit, he looked every bit as impressive, since it looked like at any moment the man's mighty muscles could barely contain them. Izuku's mind went into overdrive as he looked up at the hologram in both wonder and confusion. The letter was clearly from UA. So why was All Might the one they chose to tell him if he passed or failed? Shouldn't that be a teacher or the principal? Was this some sort of favor he was doing for the school? In case you were wondering why I, All Might, am here now on this recording, is because, starting next semester, I shall be joining the staff at UA as a heroics instructor, announced the #1 hero. "Really? Yes, really," said the recorded image of All Might with a nod. "Now then, young Izuku Midoriya, let's get to your test results. For the written portion, you placed extremely well. But I'm sure that's not what you're really interested in. No, you want to know how you did on the practical." It was here that All Might's smile then faltered slightly, a sight that didn't go unnoticed by Izuku, causing his heart to drop. On the practical, you scored 14 villain points. I'm sorry to say that alone will not be enough to allow you into the hero course. I knew it, thought Izuku as that one sentence rang through his mind, head slumping downward, falling onto his knees. In his pocket, he could feel the familiar ring telling him he had gotten a text message, but paid it no mind as he just stared at the floor. Really, he should have known that he wouldn't get in. His shield was useful to protect himself in a fight, but defeating villains was a completely different story. At least I get to keep the disc, right? Said Izuku, trying to look on the bright side. A personalized message from All Might is not something too many people have. Huh, what do you mean hurry up? Came the recorded voice of All Might. Izuku's head lifted to see the symbol of peace looking at something or someone off camera, his expression looking confused. How many more of these are left? That many. Again, Izuku's heart sank yet got back onto his feet. With his head down, he prepared to walk over to the device to see if he could turn it off before the battery powering it ran out. But then, well, young Midoriya, before we continue, there is someone here who wishes to have a word with you, continued All Might. Izuku paused, his hand outstretched and ready to turn off the device, as he looked up. Then, from off to the side, the pro hero Midnight walked into view as if she were walking onto a set. Dressed in her hero costume, she looked exactly the same as she did all those years ago. Once she stood next to the larger hero, her image smiled in his direction and waved. Well, looks like we meet again, little hero, said Midnight, her tone playfully. It seems like only yesterday I was sitting on your hospital bed, listening to you ask me so many personal questions that plenty of naughty men have been asking me for years. Or how red your face turned when I explained what R-rated meant. All Might, who had been just standing here, just nodding his head, suddenly snapped it in the direction of Midnight so fast that Izuku thought he heard it crack. His smile was gone, replaced with utter shock. He seriously asked that, and you seriously told him? Izuku's hands flew to his face, covering it as it quickly turned red with embarrassment, though he was thankful that Midnight didn't answer All Might, just waving him off slightly as her eyes seemed to focus on the young shield user. I am glad that, despite how many years have passed, you're still the same person I met in that alleyway, continued Midnight, still standing tall, shield raised to protect others with everything you have. Only now, your body has finally grown to match your heroic heart. At that, dozens of smaller frames appeared around the two heroes who were now smiling. With wide eyes, Izuku saw that each of them showed footage from the exam. He watched as a recording of himself moved to block a strike from a one-pointer from striking 𝗵𝗃𝗃 on the side of the head. Another showed an airstrike shield appearing in front of another examinee who had fallen to the ground. Below that showed him helping an injured hero hopeful seek cover, using his shield to protect them, even when he was trying to ward off the zero-pointer as displayed with pride. Young Midoriya, said All Might as he stepped forward once more, his smile returning in full force. Izuku heard his phone ring once again, but he ignored it as his favorite hero spoke to him in a voice that seemed to radiate pride and compassion. It is not the quirk that defines the hero but the actions you take. Those actions inspire others to follow in your footsteps. What you did throughout the entire exam was exemplify heroism's core concept, even when you knew that it wouldn't benefit you. Both you and your friend rushed out to save not only that young girl but everyone you came across. How could any hero school worth its salt turn away someone who is willing to risk their life for the greater good? Which was why there were other factors in the practical exam. Rescue points. A panel of judges watched and scored students on their heroic deeds. And you, young Midoriya, scored a total of 97 rescue points. Izuku's eyes began to water slightly as both All Might and Midnight each took a step to the side, revealing a scoreboard with several names. There, at the top, was his name followed by both his scores before finishing off with the total. With 14 villain points plus the 97 rescue points gave him an impressive 111 points. But that wasn't the only thing the freckled boy noticed. Right below his name was 𝗵𝗃𝗃. She had done much better with the villain points, earning a score of 45, while her rescue points were at 55. That gave her an even 100 points total. Though he was happy for her, Izuku felt like she should have gotten first place since she had done most of the hard work. Finally, Izuku looked at the last name he recognized right under 𝗵𝗃𝗃's. It was 𝐒𝐭𝐴𝐻𝐿. He had passed without needing any rescue points, earning himself 77 points. Welcome, young Midoriya, to your hero academia, exclaimed All Might while giving the shield hero a thumbs up, his teeth seeming to sparkle on command. I look forward to seeing you in class, Midnight said, waving at the camera before winking. Feeling like his heart would explode from happiness if he continued to listen any longer, Izuku reached out to turn off the device. It all felt so surreal to him. He had passed. He was not just going to the top hero school in the country, but All Might would be one of his teachers. Was there any way things could get better? As his phone rang again, Izuku finally pulled it out to find he had gotten several text messages from 𝗵𝗃𝗃. Simple, short phrases like I got in, you got in, and All Might and Midnight are going to be our teachers appeared on the screen. As he scrolled down, Izuku saw that Raphtalia had also sent him a picture of herself. No doubt one taken by either her parents or a friend who was visiting, as he couldn't see her holding her phone to take a selfie. The image was just her jumping into the air in what he assumed was her bedroom, tears running down her face as she smiled. Izuku felt his own tears fall down as well, happy for them both. After texting her back, Izuku went to his workbench and pulled out some unused metal before getting to work. As he began to work, Izuku thought more and more about what had happened. He knew that he was still at the start of his journey to becoming the type of hero he wanted to be. But that didn't mean he, along with his friends, couldn't celebrate. News of Midoriya's and Bakugo's acceptance into UA had already spread across his middle school when they arrived the next day. Many of Izuku's classmates approached the green-haired teen to congratulate him, as well as express some envy that he had gotten into such a good school. The same couldn't be said for Bakugo, who had been so sure that he had not only gotten first place in the practical but would also be the first student in Aldera to ever get into UA. As soon as he walked into class and laid eyes on Izuku, the ashen blonde became so enraged that it seemed like every blood vessel in his body would explode with the same amount of force that came from his hands. This caused everyone around him to give Bakugo a wide berth, except for Midoriya, who just sat in his seat waving politely to his childhood friend. He didn't even look nervous when the two were called to the principal's office to be congratulated by the man. When that school day ended, Bakugo roughly grabbed Izuku by his uniform jacket, where he then dragged the freckled-faced youth outside. Then, once he had found a corner that was isolated, the blonde slammed Izuku against the wall. "I'm going to tell you this once. Drop out now," yelled Bakugo at the top of his lungs, spit flying forward onto the face of the green-haired teen who just stood there calmly. In fact, the only time Izuku winced was when the explosive teen's spittle landed in his eye. "I was supposed to be the only one in this shitty school to go to UA. Me, you took that honor away from me. That, and my spot on the top of the charts, those belong to me. Well, you still did very well. I mean, third place is nothing to be ashamed of," replied Izuku in a pleasant and kind tone, which caused Bakugo's eyes to widen in rage. His pupils were nothing more than tiny dots as more veins filled his eyes. The blonde's teen clenched so tightly that, if they moved, sparks would be flying outward. As Bakugo's hands began to shake, Izuku reached into his pocket to pull something out. "Anyways," continued Izuku, "I've been working on this since I heard you aced the mock test. I wanted to give it to you once you got your acceptance letter. Congratulations." Somehow, Bakugo's pupils became even smaller as he looked down at what looked like a ring box held in Izuku's scarred hand. The young Midoriya flipped it open with one hand, revealing a pin shaped like a stick of dynamite made of silver. As Bakugo looked at it, he began breathing hard before looking up at the one who had made the pin. "What is this?" growled Bakugo between deep, angry breaths. "It's a gift," said Midoriya with a smile. "You know, something to wear on your uniform, if the school allows it. Or you could put it on your backpack or—" "Shut the hell up," roared Bakugo, silencing the green-haired teen. The next thing Izuku knew, his childhood friend had grabbed the gift made for him before tossing it aside with an explosion from his hand. Izuku, who was still wincing from the explosion, failed to react in time as Bakugo placed his smoking hands on the shoulders of the shield user before pushing against the wall once more. "You can keep your damned pity gifts, you shitty nerd, because I don't want them. Do you hear me? I don't need them. I don't need you looking down on me." What makes you think that Bakugo's words were suddenly cut short as he closed his eyes? For a moment, he held Izuku there in silence before pulling away and letting Izuku drop onto his feet. Without another intelligible word, the blonde bomber stormed off, leaving Izuku alone, shoulders slumped, as he watched his childhood friend storm off. After that day, Izuku didn't talk much with his childhood friend. Instead, for the next several months, Izuku Midoriya continued to work out his body as best as possible. Despite being told that he had done well, the young teen had seen where he needed to improve. And if he wanted to succeed, to truly become the hero he wanted to be, Izuku knew that every moment counted. His solo workouts did not last for long, thankfully, as he was later joined by a new training partner. "Thank you again so much for letting me stay here," said Raphtalia cheerfully as she entered the Midoriya's apartment. She was wearing a red blouse that had several darker red strings running up her midsection, which gave the impression of shoelaces given how thick they were along with jeans. As she walked, she carried a small suitcase in front of her. "Think nothing of it," replied 𝐒𝐭𝐻 warmly as she led the teenager through the apartment. Behind them, Izuku did his best to carry two other, larger suitcases. The green-haired teen was hunched over, one of the cases resting on his back while his shield hand took hold of the handle of the opposite one. A slight bit of sweat on his brow as the teen moved the heavy objects into his home, ready to drop them in the guest room. "It's been so long since I've seen you," continued 𝗏𝐭𝐻, her voice warm and loving. "The last time I saw you, you were just so small. But look at you now, all grown up and heading off to UA. Oh, here we are. The matriarch of the Midoriya household paused briefly in front of a doorway before opening it and gesturing for the teens to enter. 𝗵𝗃𝗧 was the first to walk inside, finding signs that the room had once been a home office before being transformed into a guest room. On one side, a desk with an older model computer sat covered in a semi-transparent cloth to keep the dust off. If one looked a little closer, they could see that there was also an in-and-out tray that still had papers on it as well as a few other knickknacks. As for the rest of the room, it was pretty cozy. There was a single bed with light creamy green colored sheets with matching pillows tucked into the opposite corner, in lieu of a window. 𝐒𝐭 had long ago put up a painting of rice paddy fields with a mountain in the distance, and beneath the painting, right next to the bed, was a nightstand with a cheap alarm clock on it as well as a vase with a few freshly picked flowers. As 𝗵𝗃𝗧 looked around, slowly placing her suitcase next to the bed, 𝐒𝐭 let out a little sigh. "I know it's not much," 𝐒𝐭 began, only to be cut off as their guest spun around to give a bright smile with her eyes closed. "It's wonderful," said the teenage girl, her voice filled with warmth. Then, as Izuku placed the rest of her luggage in the room, the Tanuki girl reached into her own bag before pulling out a somewhat thick envelope which she then held out towards 𝐒𝐭. "Before I forget, my parents wanted to give this to you, as payment for putting me up while I'm in town." 𝐒𝐭 barely looked at the offering as she pushed it back. "You keep it," the older woman said, her voice holding a tone that held finality. "The reason we offered to let you stay here was so that you wouldn't waste money renting a hotel room. You give that money back to your parents." Izuku watched from the doorway, the look in 𝗵𝗃𝗧's eyes telling him that she wanted to argue. However, after thinking about it for a moment, she relented without another word. Seeing that the matter was settled, Izuku decided to move on to a more important subject. "So, do you have any ideas on where you'd like to stay?" he asked. Instantly, 𝗵𝗃𝗧 brightened as she returned the envelope back into her suitcase before pulling out several printouts. "I have a few ideas within my parents' budget," she said while walking over to the shield user. Once she stood next to him, she positioned the papers so that both teens could easily read them. The top printout had what looked like a 3-story Japanese-style inn with a bright red roof. In front of the building were several sakura trees in full bloom as several people who were clearly students walked in and out of the building. "My parents really like this student boarding house," began 𝗵𝗃𝗧 while trying not, and failing slightly, to make a face that betrayed her disapproval. "Mainly because there's at least 3 Kobans near it. They also have a number of rules that I looked up on their website. Like you have to give them a 2 days notice when bringing guests over, room inspections, and a curfew. Also, it's a little farther away from UA than I want, about a 45-minute trip by train. But it is the only place on this list that has a pool." 𝗵𝗃𝗧 then put the printout at the bottom of the pile, showing a more modern-looking building. "To be honest, I'd much rather prefer getting a regular student apartment. This way, I get the place to myself. This one is about a 10-minute walk to UA, and has a gym suited for hero training in the basement. There's also a pool nearby. Then there's this one. But, it's a little above my budget." For some time, the two teens stood there, going over all the apartment options that 𝗵𝗃𝗧 had been looking up over the last several weeks. Meanwhile, Izuku just stood there, listening to 𝗵𝗃𝗧 as she went over all the pros and cons on her list while watching her face light up whenever she talked about something she was excited about. Since the plan was that he was going to go with her to look at all of these places, including the student boarding house, he would save his own opinion until he was there. After they had gotten through the list, the pair began heading out to visit these apartments. Or, at least, they started to as 𝗵𝗃𝗧 paused in the hallway. "Izuku, what's that?" asked 𝗵𝗃𝗧, sounding very confused. Turning around, Izuku saw that she was standing at his door, a door that he was just now realizing he had left open. Cheeks burning, the green-haired teen wondered what was in his room that had shocked her as they made his way over. Was it his All Might collection? No, it couldn't be since he had told her about it. Besides, it was a healthy amount, right? Or maybe she noticed the magazine he had been reading earlier that day, the one with Mirko and Ryukyu on the cover. Did she think that he read smut? No, that wasn't it. He was reading it for the articles detailing their quirks and making notes on what possible shields he could get if he ever got a strand of hair from them. Nothing weird at all. When Izuku got to the door, he shot a quick glance into his room. Strangely, he didn't see anything that seemed weird to him. The magazine he had been reading was nowhere in sight, meaning he must have put it away. His workbench had a few projects he had been working on, but nothing that would be seen as weird. Heck, he didn't even have any stray underwear lying on the floor. Feeling somewhat confused as well as curious about what had shocked his friend so much, he turned to look at her. It was then that 𝗵𝗃𝗧 pointed to something in the room, Midoriya following the path of her finger. What he saw at the other end caused him to blink in surprise. "I don't get it," he said, staring at the newest item in the room. "Didn't you keep your acceptance holodisc?" "I did," said 𝗵𝗃𝗧, a bit louder than normal, making Izuku jump. The girl then marched into his room before gesturing with both hands. "But I didn't do this." Tilting his head, Izuku examined the site before him. The disc was lying there on a small, silken pillow and protected by a square glass case which the teen cleaned every day, twice when he took the device out to watch the message again. The case and its contents were held up at eye level by a pedestal made of dark, polished oak. How could I not memorialize it? Izuku asked, stunned. It has all might and midnight telling me that I got into UA. A personalized holographic recording that deserves to be passed down and kept as a family treasure. The only way it could get any better is if it was also signed by All Might. Izuku would have continued to talk had he not noticed Raphtalia's suppressed laugh. Maybe we should get going, Raphthalia said between small bits of giggles, taking hold of Izuku's wrist as she led them out of the apartment. Over the next couple of days, Izuku and Raphthalia looked at all the apartments on the girls' list. Some, like the one she had wanted that was close to UA, had already signed the lease for their last available room. As for the one her parents wanted, that was also a hard no. Not only did the room feel smaller than what the pictures suggested, making her feel claustrophobic, but according to Izuku, the closest hero here did not have the best track record. That was something Izuku was sure to bring up. While she went to check on the room sizes, the view, double-checking the rent, and so on, Izuku would talk about how many hero agencies were close to the apartment as well as the names of the heroes there. This had been a little weird for the girl, as Izuku seemed to have memorized all of this until... I just thought that it would put your parents' mind at ease when you told them, the green-haired teen explained after Raphthalia had asked why it mattered. If something does happen, knowing how many heroes are in the area and knowing if they have good track records can help put their minds at ease. Hearing that brought a genuine smile to the girl's face, accepting the shield user's advice. She also thought it would make a far better excuse as to why she wasn't going with the boarding house her parents wanted. Also, she found it rather cute whenever Izuku wanted to try and get an autograph from the nearby heroes. Eventually, Raphthalia decided on an apartment overlooking Takoba Municipal Beach. While it didn't have a gym or anything like that, it had all the utilities she could need as well as having a few notable heroes in the area. But what really sold it for her was the price as well as its location to the ocean. Due to the amount of trash she saw from her bay window overlooking the beach caused the value of the apartment to drop over the years. Not that she minded, as she could still see the sparkling ocean at night. After getting settled in, both she and Izuku decided to start their training in a forested area the two of them had passed when leaving the Midoriya's apartment complex. The area, according to Izuku, was the same one where he and Bakugo had played in when they were younger. At first, both teens figured it would just be a nice isolated spot where they could use their quirks without anyone seeing them as well as providing them with plenty of shade. But, as the days went by, the two quickly discovered that this place was a hidden gold mine of training potential. There were several large trees with branches sturdy enough to hold them, allowing for them to practice their fighting styles in midair and with narrow footing. There were also several fallen trees that acted like bridges over rivers of various sizes. As for training on the ground, they learned to use the trees to their advantage in various ways. As they trained, Izuku learned more about Raphtalia's quirk, Tanuki. This quirk not only gave her the ears and tail of the named animal, but it also gave her some of the illusionary abilities associated with some of the folklore surrounding the named creature. Right now, all she could do were minor illusions, but when you combine that with her sword skills as well as the forest environment, it became a powerful combo. It forced Izuku to start relying on senses other than sight as he tried to pick out with his ears where the next attack would come from. Finally, the first day of the new semester at UA had come and Izuku Midoriya was heading down the sidewalk with the gates of the great school in sight. The sunlight shined brightly against his shield, the teen having spent several hours the night before polishing it so that it looked its best. Dressed in his new UA uniform, there was almost a skip in the boy's step as he walked while both his hands held onto the straps of his backpack. He had even managed to fit one of his favorite All Might action figures inside of the bag so that, the man himself could sign it. That, as well as something special for another student. As he drew closer to the great gates, Izuku noticed a familiar set of ears on the other side of a steady flow of students entering the building. Carefully, the young Midoriya began to slip past the mass of teens until Raphthalia was in his field of vision. She was just standing there, her back against the wall next to the gate while checking her phone. Oh man, thought Izuku, his cheeks becoming lightly tinted red as he got a good look at her in her uniform. As she looked so cute, as should I say something. Would that be weird? Izuku, cried Raphthalia happily, bouncing slightly where she stood when she saw the shield user. I was hoping to meet you here. Why you were, stammered Izuku as he gave the girl his best smile while scratching the back of his head, hoping that she didn't notice that he was blushing. Raphthalia nodded, looking pleased as she did so while her tail began to wag, an act that he found adorable. The girl hummed while glancing over at the school. I thought that, if we had time, you'd like to explore the school with me before class begins. Just so we have an idea where everything was. Izuku let out a hum of his own, having no real issue with the idea. In fact, he rather liked it. Knowing where everything was would give them a huge advantage moving forward. Heck, thinking about it, it was the sort of thing that a hero should do when arriving in a new area. But did they have enough time to make the most out of it? Reaching into his pocket to pull out his phone, Izuku slid his thumb over the screen to check the time. What he saw showed that he had arrived earlier than he thought, so there was no real rush to get to class. So, with a nod, he agreed. For about the next 20 minutes, the pair navigated themselves throughout the school. Their first stop was locating their classroom so they could figure out where everything else was in relation to it. It took a while to find the massive doors, and when they did, they gave it a solid look before turning around without bothering to go in. From there, the pair continued to look around the school while being mindful of the time. After all, neither of them wanted to be tardy on their first day and knew there would be plenty of time to check out the rest of the school. So they managed to find the lunchroom, drooling when they saw the massive menu provided by the Hero Lunch Rush, as well as several of the massive gyms. Izuku marveled at everything he saw, finding that the school had well exceeded his expectations. One gym had various exercise equipment that one could find in any gym, except many of the machines had been modified to accommodate students of all shapes and sizes. Another had what could only be described as an indoor maze, littered with robots and other hazards. Heck, looking at the ceiling, Izuku believed that the staff might even be able to control weather conditions, which was amazing. It was only when the alarms they had set on their phones, signaling that class would start in 10 minutes, did they start heading back to Class 1A. "It's so wonderful that we're going to be in the same class," exclaimed Raphtalia, her tail continuing to wag while a bright smile lit up her face. Izuku couldn't help but nod. "I know," he said while thinking back to the day they took the biggest test of their lives. "I wonder if they did that because they saw how well we worked together during the entrance exam." "Well, regardless, I'm glad to be doing all this by your side," replied the girl cheerfully. A moment later, Raphtalia's expression began to somber before she lowered her head a little while brushing away her bangs. The sight of this brought Izuku a mix of panic, both at how cute that gesture was as well as worry by the sudden shift. "So, let's do our best to become the heroes we want to be." Began Izuku looking up as he spoke. "I don't think I ever asked you why you wanted to become a hero." "Really?" asked Raphtalia as she raised her head to look at her friend. "I could have sworn you did." Izuku turned his gaze to look at her before shaking his head. "I think I have an idea though," he admitted. "About what happened to us." Raphtalia nodded, her lips tightening as her gaze became more distant, like she was looking into the past. "There's not a day that's gone by when I haven't thought about that time," she said at last with a heavy sigh. "About the others who were with me. About the monsters who put us through all that. I found out that they managed to save some of the other kids and arrest the people who bought them like they were nothing more than objects." Izuku nodded, though his mother didn't like it. She had taken him to the police station and called up the police and heroes who had been working on the case several times after he had returned home. They never told them everything, but what they did tell the Midoriya family was enough to put the family a bit more at ease. At least for Izuku it did. The young child found himself falling asleep more easily, no longer fearing that when he woke up he would be back in that little room, knowing that most of the people who were involved in the kidnappings were now behind bars. "But there were others that got away," continued Raphtalia. "I told the police and heroes about this weird, short man who looked like a doctor who came in. He was interested in children who had powerful quirks. As far as I know, they never found him. And there were others they couldn't find as well, criminals and children alike. I know that it's unrealistic, but I want to fight as hard as possible so that no one ever goes through what we went through. That's the sort of hero I want. No, I am going to be." She then looked over at Izuku. "So, what about you?" she asked, suddenly changing topics. "What made you want to become a hero?" "Same as me." In response, Izuku blushed as he scratched the back of his head. "I actually wanted to become a hero before that night," admitted Izuku with a bit of a fond smile. "I've wanted it ever since I saw All Might's debut video. It's nothing like it was about him fighting some villain for the first time, just saving people. What stuck out to me was how he smiled, reassuring everyone. That's why I want to be a hero, to save as many people as I can. I want everyone who sees my shield to know that I'm there to make sure everything will be okay, that I'll protect them from whatever danger is there." Izuku then paused before letting out a laugh. "I'd do it with a smile like All Might's, but that didn't work so well the first time I tried it. It's the thought that counted," chuckled Raphtalia as she no doubt recalled the memory of Izuku's failed attempt. "Maybe you should practice more." That got a wicked grin from Izuku. Without another word, his face seemed to morph into an almost exact double of the number one hero's. Then, when he spoke next, he did so with the same bombastic energy that All Might was known for. "How's this?" Seeing this as well as hearing All Might's voice coming from her friend's mouth caused Raphtalia to begin to laugh uncontrollably, lightly punching Izuku in the shoulder. As they began to calm down, the two realized that they were alone in the hallway. Right up ahead, Izuku could see the Class 1 sign. Not knowing if he would ever get another chance to be alone with Raphtalia today, Izuku made a snap decision. Stopping where he was, he set down his backpack. Upon seeing this, the Tanuki girl stopped as well, watching him as he began fishing through his bag. "What are you doing?" she asked, bending down while placing her hands on her knees. "Class is going to be starting soon." "I know." Just as his fingers wrapped around a small package, Izuku looked up to see something he never thought he'd see in his life. It was the face of a man with bloodshot eyes and messy, black hobo-like hair looking back at him without so much as blinking. What's more, the rest of his body looked like a massive yellow caterpillar. Yelling and jumping to his feet, Izuku raised his shield while 𝗵𝗃𝗧𝗟 looked ready to swing her bag at the thing. "About time you noticed me," said the thing as it got up, its voice deep and tired. It then unzipped the zipper on its body, revealing it to be nothing more than a sleeping bag which the man inside then slipped out. Now both teens could see that he was a man dressed all in black with a white scarf around his neck that obscured his mouth. Not that this put either of them at ease, still holding up their weapons in case this strange man decided to attack. "I've been trailing the two of you since you both walked away from the classroom," continued the man as he looked down at them, placing his hands in his pockets as he did so. "If the two of you are serious about wanting to become heroes, then we're going to have to work on your awareness. But at least you two weren't wasting time, which is precious in a hero's line of work. Rather than sitting around in class socializing, you were using what time you had to familiarize yourself with your new environment." Strangely, being told that they had been followed for that long did not put either teen at ease. In fact, it did just the opposite, something that man clearly noticed. "Relax," sighed the man. "I'm your homeroom teacher, Mr. Aizawa." That got the two young heroes in training to lower their guards. Not by much, as neither of them had ever heard of this man nor did they recognize him. Plus there was also the fact that his gaze upon them was somewhat unnerving, like he was peering into their souls, but just enough for it to show that they were relaxing their guard. After all, only students and faculty members could get into the school. For several long seconds, the three stood there in what felt like a staring contest before finally, Mr. Aizawa spoke again. "I saw the footage of your performance in the entrance exam. Care to tell me why the two of you were working together?" This surprised the two, as they had not expected anyone to ask, but they complied with the request, not seeing any reason to argue. Nor did they lie. Izuku had explained that it was never stated in the rules that they couldn't work together, and that, given how the exam was set up, they decided to treat it as a mass breakout. 𝗵𝗃𝗧𝗟 also chimed in, explaining that this way they could work more effectively while watching each other's back. Mr. Aizawa remained silent, only nodding his head from time to time without interrupting them. In truth, he had already suspected that this was the case. He, along with all the other teachers, had watched all of the footage starting at the beginning of the exams. Izuku had first caught his attention back when President Mike had been explaining the rules. To find a student who was willing to ask if they had to destroy the robots was not something one finds all that often. Usually, the students were ready to show off the power of their quirks, while those who had non-combative quirks just sank in their seats. Then came the practical, watching another rare event unfolding right before his eyes. And now, hearing the reasoning behind their actions that day, made him glad he had agreed to Midnight's suggestion of having them in the same class. So, when the two had finished speaking, Mr. Aizawa decided to give them a compliment. "I see. That was very rational thinking on both of your parts. Now, class will be starting soon." As he moved to take a step, his shoe collided with Izuku's bag, causing his All Might figure's arm to slip out. The teacher saw this, eyes narrowing in disapproval, but said nothing else about it as he continued to walk. "Really?" asked 𝗵𝗃𝗧𝗟. "You're not upset that we didn't do everything on our own?" Without bothering to stop, Aizawa motioned the two to follow him to the classroom, which they did, after Izuku quickly grabbed his bag, sliding the All Might figure fully inside. "I've seen more than my fair share of so-called pro heroes heading into situations like that. Plenty of heroes around but refusing to work together," explained the man, his voice becoming deathly serious, as if he was speaking from personal experience. "More interested in getting the spotlight all to themselves as well as the money from the villains they capture. It's not practical, and the ones who end up paying the price are usually the ones who were there to help. And as you yourself said, it wasn't against the rules. With that said, I am disappointed in you, Midoriya. You should have known that the amount of time you bought with that shield of yours when you fought the zero-pointer would have been negligible at best. Time that could have been better spent helping your teammate." By this point, Aizawa's hand was at the door ready to open it. "Now, let's see what else you both can do," he finished, sliding the door open to reveal a class that was too distracted talking to each other to notice him. "Die!" The loud war cry of the explosive bomber teen echoed throughout the field, followed closely by an explosion coming from his hand. Izuku, 𝗵𝗃𝗧𝗟, and the rest of Class 1 watched, all dressed in tracksuits provided by Mr. Aizawa, as the ball he had been holding rocketed into the air at deadly speeds. As for the teacher himself, he kept his gaze focused on a device held in his hand. After making a beeping noise, he turned it around so that everyone could see Bakugo's score. over 700 meters. It's important that all of you understand your maximum potential, said Aizawa in his tired voice. He slowly eyed the 20 students in his class. In order to do this, all of you will be participating in a series of physical exercises using your quirks. It's the most rational way to determine your max potential as heroes. It was then that Izuku noticed that Mr. Aizawa's bored look became annoyed and focused. He, along with several other students who noticed this, turned their heads at the subject of the man's irritation. It was the blue-haired teen with the glasses from the entrance exam. The tall teen had raised his hand before speaking in a loud voice once he felt he had Aizawa's attention. But sir, won't we miss the opening ceremony and orientation? The teen said loudly. As students at the most prestigious hero school in the country, we should. I have just 3 years to get you all ready for the real world, interrupted Aizawa. He had not raised his voice, but something in his tone held enough power to instantly silence his student. As such, it would be irrational to waste such time on pointless ceremonies. However, if you would rather be at the entrance ceremony, just say the word and I'll have you transferred to general studies. That caused the blue-haired teen to stiffen as his face was filled with horror. Everyone watched him shaking his head no. His words half-formed as stuttered out a quick apology. Now, if there are no more interruptions, continued Aizawa, shooting a brief glance at the student before continuing, I'd like to set some ground rules for these tests. As I said, all of you will be able to use your quirks. However, you are not to use them in any deliberate way to interfere with your classmates. If you do, then I will mark your score for that exercise as a 0. Secondly, you all get 1 shot at each test. You should always be giving it your all and I will not accept any excuses. Also, these are solo tests, so no helping each other out. These tests are meant to deem your overall potential after all. As he said this last part, Mr. Aizawa's gaze focused on both Izuku and Raphtalia for a moment. And, finally, the person with the lowest score will be deemed as having no potential as a hero. As such, that student will be expelled. This caused an uproar with the students, many complaining loudly. One girl, the same one Izuku and Raphtalia had saved during the entrance exam, spoke out about it being unfair to kick them out when they had just got here after working so hard. If this bothered Mr. Aizawa, his face didn't show it. His voice, on the other hand, fair, Aizawa began in a dark tone. Do you call a couple's car being thrown against a building, with them inside no less, by a random villain fair? What about people who lose their homes to an earthquake or a volcano? Is what happened to them fair as well? The world is full of unfairness. Some of you know that better than most. Having this caused both Izuku and Raphtalia to stiffen, their fists clenching. While Mr. Aizawa was not looking at either of them directly, the two felt as if that last part was directed at them. Yes, they knew just how unfair the world could be. As heroes, it will be your duty to combat this world of unfairness head-on, continued Aizawa, to rise above it. So, prove to me that you being here isn't a mistake, that you didn't just have a lucky day during the entrance exams. Show me that you can go plus ultra. With that, Mr. Aizawa's tests began, starting with the 50-meter dash. As Mr. Aizawa called up the first two, Raphtalia and the girl who had spoken up earlier named Ochako Uraraka, the rest of the class moved off to the side to watch. With a hand on his chin, Izuku watched as Raphtalia stretched while Uraraka began touching her shoulders and feet for some reason. When the race began, Raphtalia took a swift and decisive lead before crossing the finish line a good 2 seconds before Uraraka. While that had been an impressive first test, it was nothing compared to what happened next. The two who were called up next were a pink-skinned girl named Mina Ashido and Kaken. Once they were given the signal to start, everyone watched in awe as Ashido began sliding towards the finish line looking like she was skating, while Kaken used his explosive abilities to launch himself there. Once their times had been given, the two walked back to the group as 2 more students were called up while Izuku spared a glance down to his shield. This might be difficult, he thought with a slight frown. People with quirks that can boost their performance like Kaken will have an easier time and will be able to score higher. Meanwhile, people like me and Raphtalia will have to rely mostly on our own physical training until we can figure out some way of using our quirks to help us. From there, the tests continued as the day went on with Izuku watching the other members of Class 1 for inspiration, like how Aoyama used his naval laser to propel him across the track in the 50-meter dash. Well tried to, as he only got about halfway before he had to turn off his quirk due to his stomach hurting. Then there was Minta, a person most of the class was already beginning to dislike. The pint-sized, bald-haired teen was drooling where he stood with the rest of the class, staring at the girls' chests as they got closer and at their rears after they passed him. Not to mention the crude comments he made. Izuku found himself glaring briefly at Minta when he had said he'd love it if Raphtalia would shake her tail in his direction. But, despite his personality issues, the grape-haired teen had used the bouncing properties of his orbs to bounce across the track. Unfortunately, despite Izuku putting his brain into overdrive as he went over all his shields and their properties, he wasn't able to come up with anything that could help him out with this test. Instead, he had to rely on his own physical training he had been doing over the past several years, something he knew he would no doubt have to do with the majority of these exams. Thankfully, as the tests continued, his physical fitness kept him from placing last in any of the exams. The same went with 𝗲𝗲𝗪, who, impressively, ranked 4th when it came to the grip strength test. During that same event, 𝗧𝗍𝗂 had tried using his two-headed black dog shield on the grip strength devices. He had a theory that he might be able to trigger the shield's activation if he smacked the device with the shield. It sort of worked as the dog heads bit into the device. However, since he had no control on where they bit, they missed the grip and ended up using it like a chew toy for a few seconds. Inspiration didn't hit him until the standing long jump. When it became his turn, an idea just appeared in his head as he stood at the starting point. Raising his shield, 𝗧𝗍𝗂 activated his airstrike shield and jumped onto it. Once he was in the air, the teen created a second shield before running and jumping onto his makeshift platform. But he didn't stop there, instead creating another shield as the first vanished behind him, which he then jumped onto. Over and over this continued, until he had secured the highest score far from the sandbox. As he jumped back down to the ground, a few of the other students let out some impressed cheers. Even the frog girl 𝗬𝗍𝗪 gave him a thumbs up as well as a ribbit. 𝐈𝐵, the blue-haired boy, however, was not so impressed. Unacceptable, he shouted, turning to look at their homeroom teacher while making a chopping motion with his arm. That was a clear violation of how to do the standing long jump. Mr. 𝗧𝗏, surely you will not allow such blatant cheating to stand. In return, Mr. 𝗧𝗏 gave the teen a look that could have been out of annoyance or boredom. The point of the exam was to clear the sandbox. Once you're in the air, I don't care what you do as long as you don't touch the ground, he said, ending the matter in a way that made it clear not to bring this sort of thing up again. 𝗧𝗍𝗂 was only able to use the airstrike shield once more during the ball toss, with the only rule being that he had to remain in the circle. 𝗧𝗍𝗂 used airstrike shield and second shield again as platforms as he jumped from one to another, gaining a greater distance off the ground while still technically remaining in the circle. Once he felt he was high enough, 𝗧𝗍𝗂 flung the ball as far as he could, gaining a score of 127 meters. Then, after a few more tests, it was over. You should all have a good idea of where you placed. 𝗧𝗏 spoke in his usual tired tone while pulling out a remote. With the press of a button, a large holographic screen appeared displaying everyone's ranking. Upon seeing it, both 𝗧𝗍𝗂's and 𝗲𝗲𝗪's eyes began scanning the list until they stopped as relieved smiles appeared on their faces. Out of the 20 students, 𝗧𝗍𝗂 had come in 12th place while 𝗲𝗲𝗪 had paced 13th. Yet, their relief quickly ended when the sobs of 𝗲𝗲𝗪 filled the air. Half the class turned to the grape-haired boy as he fell to his knees, rivers of tears running down his face that would have felt at home in the Midoriya residence. Despite excelling in the side-to-side lunge and a few other events, his scores in the majority of the tests had been well below the average. Thus he had been placed at the bottom of the list. As the tiny teen fell to his knees, still weeping uncontrollably, 𝗲𝗲𝗪 approached him while the rest just gave 𝗲𝗲𝗪 pitiful looks. There, I'm sure it'll be all right, she said softly, bending down to give him a reassuring pat on the back. No, it won't, wailed 𝗲𝗲𝗪 as he turned to look at 𝗲𝗲𝗪. How am I supposed to pick up chicks now? Becoming a hero was my only chance to make it with the ladies. Pity quickly turned to disgust at the honest words of the grape-haired pervert. Even 𝗲𝗲𝗪 was struggling to keep from looking outwardly repulsed by this statement. Then 𝗧𝗏 spoke up once more. By the way, the part about expelling the student who came in last place was a lie. It was just a logical deception to ensure that you all gave it our all. 𝗲𝗲𝗪 was instantly silenced while everyone looked at the creepy smile their homeroom teacher was now giving them. Today's lesson was really intense, said 𝗲𝗲𝗪, 𝗧𝗍𝗂 nodding as he walked beside her out of the homeroom. With class dismissed for the day and dressed once more in their school uniforms, the two made their way down the hallway towards the exit while the rest of the class milled about. As they walked, the pair would occasionally glance down at the class syllabus 𝗧𝗏 had left for them, checking their schedules as they walked. I know, right? Makes me wonder just what tomorrow is going to be like, replied 𝗧𝗍𝗂 before his eyes widened in excitement. Oh hey, Midnight is teaching modern art. She is? Asked 𝗲𝗲𝗪 as she eagerly began looking over their schedule on the syllabus looking for a single name. It took her a moment before her smile widened. She is. It's been so long since I've seen her face to face. I know, right? Maybe I can show her some of my 𝗧𝗍𝗂's words were cut off as thought of his craft, remembering the gift he had yet to give to 𝗲𝗲𝗪. Glancing around, he saw that the hallway was mostly empty. If he was going to give it to her, now would be the best time. So, after taking off his backpack, 𝗧𝗍𝗂 began to rummage around in it while 𝗲𝗲𝗪 gave him a confused look. Then, just as his scarred hand touched the box which held it, a voice spoke up. I guess the rumors were true. The legendary shield has come to UA. Looking up, 𝗧𝗍𝗂 and 𝗲𝗲𝗪 saw 4 people in UA student uniforms standing near the exit. Each of them almost seemed to be posing in some manner, as if they were showing off. There was a black-haired boy with a sword that had a blue gem crossguard strapped to his waist. He was standing off to the side, leaning against the wall looking away with disinterest. But he was standing just close enough for Izuku to tell that he was a part of the group. Standing closest to him was another boy, this one with short blonde hair and green eyes with a bow strapped to his back. A bow that Izuku noticed had an orange gem arrow rest. Standing in front of them was the last and tallest of the teenage boys. A hand was brought up, touching the bangs of his long, blonde hair that was tied up in the back into a ponytail. His face held a cocky, smug expression that seemed to radiate from his eyes. In the teen's opposite hand he held a spear that held a red gem just below the tip. Finally, clinging to the tall blonde was a red-headed girl. Izuku briefly thought she had a pretty face, though she seemed the most out of place in the group as she both lacked any weapon as well as seeming physically weaker than the rest. Though there was something in her eyes that suggested to Izuku that, if you crossed her, she would gladly chew you up and then spit you out, all with a sweet smile on her face. There was also something unsettling about her that he couldn't quite place. The spear wielder took a step forward and, when he spoke, it was made clear that he had been the one who had spoken prior. "I kind of feel sorry for you, pal," continued the spear teen, his tone holding more than a bit of arrogance to it. "Guess it's just bad luck." What? Who are you?" asked a very taken aback Izuku. Right, he doesn't know. This came from the dark-haired teen, nodding slightly as he spoke. "I am Ren Amaki, second-year student of UA, and the holder of the legendary sword." "I'm also a second-year student," said the short-haired blonde as he took a step forward. "I'm Itsuki Kawasumi, and as you can see I have the legendary bow. The name's Monoyasu Kitahara, third year. And in case it wasn't obvious, I have the legendary spear," finished the oldest of the three. Then he gestured with a nod of his head towards the girl still clinging to him. "Oh, and this here is my girlfriend Malty Melremark." "Oh please Monoyasu," giggled Malty. When Malty spoke, Izuku could almost hear alarm bells going off in his head. There was just something wrong with how she talked, that the sweetness of her tone was just phony. However, those thoughts were pushed away to the side when he saw the look Monoyasu was giving 𝗵𝗃𝗧𝗟. He was looking her up and down in a way that was way too obvious what he was doing. The look in his eye was so lecherous that it could rival Minta's. "Anyways, we were all a little surprised and taken aback when we heard that a fourth weapon user like us had gotten into UA," said Itsuki, who also noticed the look Monoyasu was giving 𝗵𝗃𝗧𝗟, no doubt wanting to continue the conversation. "Even more when we heard that it was the shield user. We just wanted to check it out and see for ourselves." Izuku's eyes widened at that. So he was the fourth weapon user here at the school. He had known that there were others, but he had never really thought he would have the chance to meet any of them, and to have three of them here at UA at the same time as him. Yet, what did you mean when you said you were even more surprised when you heard it was the shield?" asked Izuku. There was a pause as the four older students gave each other a look as if having a silent conversation between themselves. Finally, Monoyasu rolled his eyes while letting out a sigh. All right. If these guys won't tell you, then I will," he said while quickly closing the distance before shoving a finger right into Izuku's chest. "The shield is the weakest of the weapons. In fact, it shouldn't even be counted as a weapon. It's more like armor. It's impressive that you managed to get into the hero course with defense alone," continued Ren, giving Midoriya a sideways look as he spoke. "However, that alone won't get you far. Guess it's just the luck of the draw. When we all took our entrance exams, we managed to get in on villain points alone," added Itsuki, now sporting a slight smirk. "And by the time we all took our exams, we were able to take down the 0-pointer. It's doubtful that you'll ever be able to do that," finished Monoyasu with a laugh. Izuku stayed silent as he listened to the group. He had heard these sorts of things before from his old school, from people like Kaken and others like him. But, for some reason, their words felt like they had more of an impact. Maybe it was because they held weapons similar to his. Maybe it was because they were his upperclassmen, people who knew more about what they were talking about. "You're wrong." Everyone jumped, startled as 𝗵𝗃𝗧𝗟 spoke up with determination in her eyes. She then stepped forward. "A hero is more than just their quirk or weapon. It's also about the type of person that they are, what they are willing to bear, willing to sacrifice in order to save others." "Well said, young lady." The four standing at the doorway jumped upon hearing the high-pitched voice, sweat appearing on their brows as they turned their heads in unison to look the other way. Standing there was a small, animal-like creature standing on its hind legs and wearing a suit. As for what it was, Izuku had no idea. While looking like an interesting cross between a bear, mouse, and cat, the creature had white fur and a scar on one of his eyes. "Who are you?" asked Izuku, tilting his head while looking down at the creature as it approached them walking on its hind legs. "He's so cute," said 𝗵𝗃𝗧𝗟, bringing her hands together. "Look at that adorable suite someone put him in." Izuku's and 𝗵𝗃𝗧𝗟's comments caused the animal to chuckle politely into one of its paws while the other four students just looked at the pair like they were insane. "You idiots," growled Monoyasu. How could you not know who that is? It's all right, Mr. Kitahara, said the creature with a light chuckle, its paws moving behind its back as his beady eyes glanced back and forth over all the gathered students. They wouldn't know, as Mr. Aizawa tends to skip orientation to put his class through the ringer. So please, allow me to introduce myself as the school's principal, Nezu. Both Izuku and Raphtalia felt like their bodies would turn to stone at any moment due to embarrassment, though the principal seemed to take their mistake in stride, letting out a light chuckle as he glanced over at the Tanuki girl. Oh, and thank you for the compliment on my suit, Ms. Raphtalia, Nezu continued. I have to get them all tailor-made and this one is brand new. Such a pity none of the staff here or even the long-time students noticed. The principal then turned to look at the 4 students by the exit. All of them looked rather nervous. It looks simply marvelous on you, Mr. Nezu, said Malty in a fake sweet tone. Yes, thank you for that, Ms. Melremark, replied Nezu, his smile faltering for a moment as he gave the redhead a once-over. But before Izuku could think about what that might mean, the principal seemed to regain a bounce in his steps as his voice became a bit more chipper. Now, I hope that you all being here was simply out of curiosity about our school's newest weapon user. It would simply be dreadful if you came here to throw your weight around or to make a fellow student feel inferior. Now, how about you all head home? If you wish to use the school grounds for afternoon training, they will be available starting tomorrow. With that, the 4 left without another word. Yet as they did, Izuku thought he saw Nezu focusing on Malty. The smile he had on his face was gone, replaced with an unnerving flat expression as his beady black eyes remained locked on her back. That was until the door closed and the small mammal turned to look at the remaining teens. A smile appeared on the animal's face, sending shivers down both their spines. I also suggest that both of you head home right away and get some rest, said Nezu with a glint in his eye. Trust me, you'll need it for your first hero class.